Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Good morning to government representatives, members of the diplomatic mission, members of the media, as well as our other CSO partners. Thank you so much for attending our event, structuring the Malaysian Ombudsman Office report launch by the Center to Combat Corruption and Cronyism, C4 Center. We'd like to thank you so much for making the time to come to our event this morning. Just a few housekeeping announcements before we start. For those of you who are participating from online, please mute your audio until the Q&A session. Without further delay, I would like to invite Mr. Pushpan Murugaya, Chief Executive Officer of C4 Center, to present the welcome and opening introductions.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. I wanted to do it off the cuff, but not confident enough, so I have to read through it. Anyway, good morning and a warm welcome to our keynote speaker, the Deputy Chief de Mission from Sweden, Robert Lejon, Excellencies from Spain and Switzerland who are joining us online, and also members of diplomatic corps, friends, officers from Bayou, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, academics, students, and some lawyers as well, and also our friends from CSO platforms. So a warm welcome to all of y'all. And also, we started at 10:30 so that we give you more time to beat the jam. It's crazy jam over here, so we took that into consideration as well. So 10:30 was just nice. Hope you had your coffee, and we're gonna have a nice session today. Okay, first of all, this project started off basically as just to come up with a simple fact sheet about ombudsman, how it works, functionality. But the more we go into researching ombudsman, we understood it and see it in a different light. There's so many issues involved. It's not as simple as it seems. So we had to look at the intersections, the jurisdictional issues, the legal implications, functionality, and even overlapping functions. So now we kind of understand how Bayou feels when they look at this kind of law-making process. And you not only have ombudsman, you have the procurement app coming up soon. You have so many other acts. So we understand your situation is pretty tough for you guys. Yeah. So anyway, that's why we took this project to see how we can maybe better understand how ombudsman can be applied, and perhaps maybe offer some assistance to the policymakers in terms of the implications and how we want to actually implement ombudsman in Malaysia. So on that context, we had a team looking at ombudsman from different angles. We looked at the context of jurisdictional issues, how the international policies, experiences from different countries. And also we understood now that we cannot take templates from anywhere around the world and plant it in Malaysia. It doesn't apply anymore. So we need to look at the best practices, find a proper framework, and see how we can fit into the Malaysian context or the cultural context in that context. We also look at PCB. We also consider the fact that, do we really need ombudsman? Let's just strengthen the PCB. Even that was part of our discussion and discourse. Why do you spend time looking at ombudsman when we can strengthen the PCB? There were some arguments for that as well. So that was one of the argument, consideration, and discourse that we had among our teams and some of our friends outside to understand whether it's necessary at all. Then we looked at the synergies. We have got MACC, we have Suhakam, AIC, IPCC. We have so many other commissions. So where does that oversight mechanism fit within the frame of ombudsman, or how does ombudsman fit within that framework? Even that, we have got a lot of issues of technicalities, how to solve that problem. Then what about the powers of ombudsman? What kind of powers do we give them? Prosecution powers? Freeze powers? So we need to define the powers as well for them to be effective. Then tenure independence will always be an issue for us in Malaysia. We need to make sure they're totally independent in terms of budgeting as well, in terms of appointments, tenure. And now I recently found out, I heard, don't know whether it's a rumor or not, that the government is not going to spend more money on having new commissions in place or whatsoever. So we have to look at that consideration as well, how to save money when you want to do a reform so there's no expenditures extra. Then we looked at also, how do we place ombudsman within the bureaucratic and political structure? Okay, you don't have the PSC in place. How do we put them under parliament? How do we, or do we change the constitution? So these are all the considerations that we looked at in our report to identify mechanisms or methods to actually put it within our framework. So we had a lot of things to discuss, a lot of issues to pick on. It took us how many months? 8 months, 6 months? 8 months to actually come up with some of recommendations, understanding the issues as well. And we hope that this report today and the launching today is to actually advance the conversation about ombudsman. Now, we acknowledge the government has mentioned that they are going to come up with Ombudsman Act soon. However, we also understand there are some oversight agencies who are not ready to accept another oversight mechanism. Maybe Bayu can share with me later a bit more information about that. So there are some more of a pushback in terms of they're not ready yet. So we need to address that issue. Hopefully that this report can give us that little bit of nudge in terms of getting people to come on board and discuss more and push the policymakers to come with a framework for ombudsman. So on that context, today's session, we have got a few sessions. The first one will be a presentation by our the author, Prisant. He will share with us the key aspects, issues of the report. And we also have a session where we hand over the document to members from Bayu. Puan Nurani will be there. And then we have the first session in the afternoon. We'll look at the current oversight mechanisms that Malaysia has at this point in time. We discussed maybe the evolution, what we have in place, what we can improve. And then the second presentation will be on basically the experience from worldwide. So how does other countries practice ombudsman? And more importantly, how they implemented the whole concept. We also have some Q&A for you later on. If you're free, you want to ask any question after the event also is possible, not a problem. But please do share as well your questions or comments so we can get more feedback from every one of you all. Now, so one more point. We took a conscious decision to print limited number of copies of the report. This is to save number of paper. Okay, so we are moving towards that direction as well. And so we want to make sure that that's the policy you have now. So we also, however, if a copy will be available online either today or tomorrow morning, so you can download the full report today or tomorrow morning. All right. And also one final request from me to all of y'all. We have published a book last year called State of Corruption. So if you can support our work, help us buy 1 or 2 books there to help us do the work that we're doing, and your support is greatly appreciated. Okay, finally, I'd like to thank everyone for your presence and hope that you will have an informative session with us today. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, Mr. Pushpan. I would now like to welcome Mr. Robert Leon. Mr. Robert Leon is the deputy head of mission at the Embassy of Sweden, a position that he assumed in August 2022. Mr. Leon has been serving with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs since 2014. Prior to coming to Malaysia, Mr. Leon served in Stockholm at the office of the Minister for Trade, and he has also been posted to the Swedish Embassy in Jakarta. Once again, I would like to invite Mr. Robert Leon to present the keynote speech. Thank you.
So, Your Excellencies, Dato, ladies and gentlemen, Selamat Pagi. Much like Pushpan, I was aiming to do this off the cuff, but also much like Pushpan, I did not have the confidence to do it. So I prepared a little speech here, partly descriptive, but also partly personal, and what it means for me with the Ombudsman as a Swedish civil servant. So it's a true pleasure being here today at the report launch on the structuring of the Malaysian Ombudsman Office, and I'm glad to see many familiar and friendly faces here in this facility. So, and also first off, I would like to thank C4 for inviting me to speak today. On behalf of the Embassy and Sweden. I am but another diplomat here in a long line of Swedish diplomats. But as I've gone through the documents of my predecessors, it's clear that C4 has been a constant and long-term friend to us all. And that goes to show the power of institutional friendships and the power of C4 as an institution here in Malaysia. It also helps that Pushpan and his colleagues are very friendly people. So that goes to show that as well. And now to the main reason for why I'm here, which is to shed some light on an institution that embodies transparency, accountability, and justice, namely the Ombudsman. So C4 kindly suggested that my speech could cover 3 key areas: the etymology and historical context of the term of ombudsman, the pivotal role played by the ombudsman in fostering accountability within public institutions and government, and the potential benefits of an independent ombudsman as a point of consideration for Malaysia. So firstly, let's start off with the pronunciation of ombudsman. It's not ombudsman, it's actually ombudsman. And the word goes back to the days of the Vikings, and it roughly translates to a representative or an agent, an envoy, and was in some occurrences the representative of the chieftain or the king. But the concept of ombudsman as we know it today, it traces back to the constitutional reform of 1809, when Sweden transitioned from an absolute monarchy into a constitutional monarchy. And the Swedish parliament was then given considerable new powers and rights, and wise parliamentarians thought that an independent institution was needed in order to ensure that laws and statutes were observed by all public agencies. So for this reason, Parliament appointed a parliamentary ombudsman and still continues to do so. The first ombudsman was appointed in 1810, and the parliamentary ombudsman still follows the basic principles that have been applied since then. Over time, this has evolved into a system of ombudsmen who collectively serve as a cornerstone of democratic governance, serving as the guardians of Swedish citizens' rights and interests. And there are now 6 officially appointed ombudsman offices in Sweden. And the first one, the parliamentary ombudsman, is the one that controls government agencies and civil servants, that they abide by the laws and regulations that dictate their work. And that includes yours truly up here on stage. Second is the Chancellor of Justice, who act as the government's ombudsman in the supervision of authorities and civil servants. It also represents the state in legal disputes, primarily actions for damages against the state. And finally, it is tasked to ensure that the limits of the freedom of the press and other media are not transgressed, and to act as the sole prosecutor in cases concerning offenses against the freedom of the press and the freedom of expression. The third one is the Consumer Ombudsman, that represent consumer interests in relation with businesses and can pursue legal action in court. The fourth is the Equality Ombudsman, that promotes equal rights and opportunities, and it supervises the Swedish Discrimination Act. The fifth is the Ombudsman for Children, that represents children's and adolescent rights in Sweden on the basis of the UN Conventions on the Right of the Child, the so-called CRC. And the sixth and final one is the Child and Student Representative, that protects the rights of children and school students, and is tasked to ensure that all schools abide by the school law in providing children's and school students with equal education and good quality in a safe environment. So those are the officially appointed ombudsman offices in Sweden, but there are many other ombudsman functions carried out in private sectors or within the labor unions, etc., and so forth. So now that we covered the etymology of the word and provided a brief snapshot of the system that we have in Sweden, so we can explore the indispensable role played by the ombudsman in fostering accountability within public institutions and government. So as an independent and impartial entity, the ombudsman serves as the watchdog. It ensures that public authorities operate within the confines of the law and that public authorities adhere to ethical standards. It is important to note that when I talk about government agencies in Sweden, that includes the government offices as well, meaning the ministries, the ministers, and even the Prime Minister's office as well. There is no separation between them. By investigating complaints, maladministration, and instances of injustice, the Ombudsman holds all decision makers and civil servants accountable for their actions, and it thereby promotes transparency and trust in government among citizens. And moreover, the Ombudsman also acts as a bridge between citizens and government by providing an accessible avenue for individuals to voice concern and seek redress for their grievances. And through their systemic investigations and recommendations for reform, Ombudsman also contributes to the continuous improvement of public administration, and it provides important analysis for reforms, and thus ultimately enhances the quality of government and also the service delivery of governments to its citizens. And now to the final point. So what are the benefits of an independent ombudsman as a point of consideration for Malaysia? So first off, it should be stated, as Pushpan also adequately put it, that lessons learned in one country does not necessarily translate into the context of another. We have to be humble about that. And secondly, even if Sweden coined the term ombudsman, and we've come some way since our humble beginnings about 200 years ago, our society too faces a lot of challenges, and it is far from perfect. But that said, I believe that there are some universal truths. And our intern at the embassy, he said a very wise thing a couple of weeks ago when we were having a chat over a cup of coffee. And he said that transparency is a very cost-effective thing. And it's funny how a simple sentence can summarize a lot of difficult issues at times. And the independent ombudsman, it is really the vanguard of transparency. It serves as a safeguard against corruption, bureaucratic inefficiencies, and human rights abuses. It bolsters public trust in governmental institutions, bringing down costs overall. And furthermore, an ombudsman plays a crucial role in addressing issues of social justice and equality, particularly concerning marginalized groups and communities whose voices often go unheard. So the ombudsman embodies the principles of democracy, accountability, good governance, and citizen empowerment. All of this is important for the development of good welfare in a society, no matter where on earth you are. So in essence, an ombudsman is a very cost-effective measure to foster good governance. And good governance is, of course, really good for everything, including the economy and the development of that. So to conclude, as a civil servant, everything I do is under the Swedish law on public access to information and secrecy. This law is very broad, and the principle is that when requested, we shall prioritize providing access to the information requested ahead of any other work that we're doing at the moment. And only when absolutely necessary are we allowed to redact specific information. The citizens of Sweden and public institutions like the Ombudsman, they have the right to scrutinize my work and all other civil servants in Sweden. Now, this, of course, it can seem scary, but I believe that it fosters sound judgment and thus better decision-making at the end. Because regardless of where anyone works, we sometimes face situations where we have to make tough calls and where we have to weigh different options without knowing in advance what could be the most positive outcome. And in those situations, us humans, we're naturally uncomfortable because we don't want to make mistakes, or we rather not get caught in making mistakes. So we tend to close lines of communication, and our line of thinking drives us to mitigation rather than finding adequate and acceptable solutions. And to quote a Swedish poet, Esaias Tegnér, he famously said a little over 200 years ago, loosely translated, that which is said in the dark derives from dark thoughts. Det dunkelt sagda är det dunkelt tänkta. So transparency is a beacon of light that sheds this darkness, and it is a tool. It's not a whip, but a tool that fosters responsible actions and solutions by the many and not by the few. So with that, I thank you.
Oh, Mr. Robert, please kindly remain in the front. I call upon, now invite Mr. Pushpan as well as Mr. Prashant Lingaraj, the author of the report, structuring the Malaysian Ombudsman Office, in order to present a copy to Mr. Robert. Thank you, Mr. Robert. Prashant and Mr. Pushpan, please remain here. We would also like to invite Puan Nurbani Shuhada binti Hasnin Layali, Principal Assistant Director of the Legal Affairs Division of the Prime Minister's Department, to also receive a copy of this report. Thank you, everyone. Without further ado, I would now like to invite Mr. Prashant Lingaraj, C4 Centre's Policy and Legal Research Officer, in order to present a summary of his findings from the report structuring the Malaysian Ombudsman Office. Mr. Prashant, the floor is yours.
Give me 1 second while I share my slides. Ben, can you, yes, thank you. So it's working, right? And it's also visible on this one. On this one. Hi, good morning, everyone. Okay, first of all, thank you guys so much for coming here today. Of course, members of the diplomatic community, government officials, as well as our friends in other CSO organizations and the media. I am, genuinely very, very excited about this potential reform agenda moving forward. It is a unique one, and the term itself, ombudsman, is one that is quite alien and foreign to Malaysians. And so I think it's really important for us to really focus on it and begin conversations and discourse about not just the concept itself, but how it fits within the Malaysian context. I think a really important element of our research over the past, again, 8 months started off as a very simple, basically briefing paper that was supposed to be just a response to Bahyu's proposal, eventually morphed into a 120-page report. So it's a lot. There's a lot. It's a very complicated area. And so essentially what we've tried to do here with this report is structure and a proposal from beginning to end, A to Z, of every single element that should be considered when it comes to creating an institution of this nature, not only in isolation, but within the larger oversight and accountability framework that we have within Malaysia. All right. So, sorry. So I think Mr. Leon mentioned as well, like if you look at how the ombudsman functions internationally, they can have a diverse set of roles and functions. And I believe that this is the first step that Malaysia can take when it comes to this particular format of accountability for the government. So first of all, let me just lay out the basic considerations that we took into account when creating these proposals, right? As far as possible, we wanted to work within the existing legislative and in particular constitutional framework. We wanted to avoid calling for constitutional amendments simply because we understand how tricky that is. We didn't want to add another layer for Bahyu to have to deal with. So as far as possible, we try to take those into account and work within the ambit that we have. we draw from international best practice, basically a review of, I would say, about 20 to 30 different countries. It was an extensive review of the different formats in which ombudsman institutions are worldwide, because as Mr. Leon also mentioned, although the concept started in Norway back in 1809, since then it has grown to about 200 countries worldwide which have some form of an ombudsman institution. And so we wanted to get as diverse a range of different forms and structures just to see which would fit best within our local context. As I mentioned, our aim is to spark discussion on this particular reform agenda. We feel that over the past year, since the announcements were first made by YB Isolina last year, I believe mid last year, there hasn't been much discourse around this topic, and we want to kind of reintroduce it into the mainstream conversation. And you will note in the report, I do use the term ombudsman simply because it is the most common term used across the world. However, if we think about the appropriateness of it within the local context, we could perhaps try to domesticize the term. Other terms that are used include things like defender of the people in South America. That's a very common term that is used. Public protector, stuff like that. So the use of the term ombudsman is not determinative. It's just an easy to use term, right? But in Malaysia, I think we should try thinking of something that would fit better. That's more self-explanatory, I guess. Okay, so first off, the significance of an ombudsman's office and why it's important, right? In general, I guess a brief summary of what ombudsman officers do. They act as an institution that fields complaints from the public about public service delivery, about government officials, or the provision of public service. Right now, what we have is known as the Public Complaints Bureau, the Bureau Pengaduan Awam, the PCB, all right? And that is an administrative agency that is stationed under the Prime Minister's Department, which is wholly governed by administrative circulars, Pekeliling And there are inherent flaws in that, right? So first of all, it's not independent. It, in essence, falls under the very same executive branch of government that it seeks to oversee. And so that lack of structural separation creates an inherent risk of improper influences or considerations being taken into account when the office is seeking to investigate the complaints that it receives. But furthermore, because the office does not lie on statutory footing, and all of its powers and structures are based on administrative circulars, that means that the entire office is susceptible to changes at any time, according to the whims of the government of the day. It is not entrenched. And so those are the two main things that we are taught, the main improvements in the system that we are looking for: structural separation and an entrenched power, either through statute or constitutional entrenchment. But we'll get to that later. All right. Now, so as I mentioned, the status quo, the PCB, yeah, that's basically everything that I said. So when we talk about what exactly the ombudsman should do within Malaysia, right? We need to think about, again, the larger oversight framework, because as Pushpan mentioned, there are many different institutions that currently practice some sort of oversight upon the government. You talk about the MACC, which looks at corruption, Suhakam, the National Human Rights Institution that looks at human rights violations, the IPCC, which looks at police misconduct, and the EAIC, which looks at enforcement agencies' misconduct. So when we were trying to structure what the role of the ombudsman would be, we wanted to fit it within that larger framework and make sure that there wasn't any large duplications of functions, just to ensure that resource utilization is not duplicated. And we decided that based on a review of international institutions, the main focus, the primary focus, should be maladministration. Now, what is maladministration? In Malay, tadbir urus, salah tadbir urus, right? What is that? In essence, it is a vague concept, but has been defined as basically administrative action or inaction that results from poor decision-making, improper considerations or improper influences. In essence, government failure. Whenever we complain about the government taking too long to respond to our queries, or being treated rudely, being sent away when you go to a particular office and being sent away because of the way that you dress, all these are examples of instances of maladministration which would fall within the ambit of a traditional ombudsman institution. And that is what we are calling for when it comes to how the main focus of this office, right? Yes. So generally speaking, what does the ombudsman do when it receives these complaints? Right now, the PCB, the Public Complaints Bureau, acts as a monitoring body. So what they do is whenever a complaint is received, they will channel it to the relevant agency, and they monitor the way in which that particular agency, ministry, department resolves the complaint. So it simply acts as a badan pemantau, monitoring body, right? With what we are calling for with the ombudsman is not for it to conduct merit-based reviews. In other words, it should not step into the shoes of the executive agency and remake the decision. Rather, it should look at whether or not procedural compliance was achieved. Was the proper protocol, the proper standard operating procedure followed? Were timelines reasonable? That's the stuff that it should look at primarily. However, there might be exceptional circumstances where even though a decision or an action was technically compliant with all procedure, it was still unreasonable or unjust in any manner. And that is where the ombudsman should also step in to provide recommendations on how that decision should be altered instead. So again, generally the executive should be granted some level of discretion in terms of implementing public policy, but exceptional circumstances should allow for the ombudsman to step in as well, because the primary focus should be public interest. Beyond anything else, that should be the fundamental consideration that is taken into account. Okay, so now the scope of what exactly government is can be a little tricky, especially in Malaysia, simply because over the past 60 years, we have created a mess in terms of corporatization of passing out public functions to private entities, statutory bodies. It is a mess. Okay, so it is a bit of a struggle in determining exactly what the ombudsman should cover. The public services as defined under the federal constitution include the education service, the police force, the armed forces, and that would be the traditional ambit of what the public service is. However, in addition to that, we also think that federal statutory bodies and privatized public utility providers. So for example, licensed electricity suppliers under the Electricity Supply Act, such as TNB, water suppliers, these bodies should also be subject to ombudsman oversight, simply because at the end of the day, they are carrying out public services. These are public services that have been delegated to private entities. But just because of that delegation, the government should not be allowed to omit accountability where there is failure in the provision of these public services. In order, again, to ensure synergy with other oversight mechanisms, we call for areas covered by the MACC, Suhakam, and IPCC to be excluded. So things like human rights violations, corruption should not fall under the ambit of the ombudsman. However, we do have one exception, and this is a bit of a big call. We do think the Enforcement Agency Integrity Commission, the EAIC, should be dissolved and its functions assigned to the ombudsman. In essence, if we look at what the EAIC does, it investigates misconduct. And the definition of misconduct under the EAIC Act largely mirrors maladministration in essence. So what the EAIC does is essentially investigate maladministration on a smaller scale. And if we have right now the PCB and the EAIC, which are doing largely the same functions, you have a situation where there is duplication of effort, wastage of public funds. We say that if cost effectiveness is the focus of this government, it makes more sense to place both of these institutions together under the ambit of the ombudsman, thereby saving public expenditure as well. And finally, in terms of the scope, now this is an area that I think might be a bit controversial simply because it's unsettled law. But from the perspective of constitutional law, based on the split between federal and state legislative competency, C4 believes that it would be unconstitutional for a federal agency to be granted the authority to oversee state public services, simply because the idea of machinery of state government is very clearly enshrined under the state list of the 9th schedule to the federal constitution. Now, again, this is not settled law. It has not, as far as we're aware, been determined by any courts. So we could be wrong. But we do believe that when we're talking about these reforms, and this isn't something that's unique to the Ombudsman, it applies as well to our procurement reforms, our freedom of information as well. This is a common theme that happens, the separation between federal and state. We do believe that that is a serious issue that we need to consider, not just how to overcome, but how to work with. So yeah, that's that. Now, in terms of preserving the Ombudsman's independence, the traditional method that is being used for all of our oversight institutions right now, the leaders of these commissions, be it Suhakam, be it MACC, are generally appointed by the Yang di-Pertuan Agong on the effectively binding unilateral discretion of the Prime Minister. We say that cannot be accepted, even for the other oversight institutions, but especially since we're creating a new one now, that cannot be the case. Especially since the Ombudsman is meant to act as a check on the executive branch. How can the chief executive be the one who chooses who leads this institution? Therefore, we are calling for urgent reforms when it comes to the way in which appointments are Ombudsman Office, Parliament, as well as removals, utilizing existing procedures such as parliamentary select committees, hearings. These things need to be utilized more effectively in order to serve a better role as an accountability framework. Finally, finally, we talk about the powers. What should the Ombudsman be allowed to do? And more importantly, what should they not be allowed to do? So the simple ones are that they should have full investigative powers, right? They should not be inhibited by secrecy provisions. They should be allowed to access necessary documents, access necessary premises and individuals, witnesses, in order to complete their investigations. Whether or not they disclose these things is another question. However, for the purposes of investigation, they should have full access to all of these matters. Apologies. However, now this was an area of intense debate within the office as well with other partner, as well as with other partner organizations as well. Should the Ombudsman be granted the power to enforce implementation of its recommendations? Now, I think in Malaysia, we have had numerous oversight institutions that we describe as toothless, right? They come up with these investigations, they come up with these reports, nothing is done. So we understand the impulse to call for mandatory implementing powers for the Ombudsman. However, we'd like to posit, or we'd like to put this forward. Traditionally, Ombudsman institutions do not have powers of enforcement. They do not work in an adversarial manner against the government. Rather, they work in a conciliatory manner. They work with government. When they receive a complaint, they work with government to ask, why is it that this has been done? Why have these failures occurred? What are the root causes? What can be done in order to improve public service delivery? It works in a very cooperative stance, okay? So if we were to introduce an ombudsman in Malaysia, which does have the power to compel the implementation of its recommendations. Number one, there may be issues of constitutionality again, because when it comes to, for instance, discipline of public officers, that is constitutionally granted to the service commissions. So that would be an infringement on that, a usurpation of those powers. And if we're talking about the alteration of policy and procedure, it might not be the most democratic thing for the ombudsman to be allowed to unilaterally change these things, because they might not be the best suited to balance competing interests. Oftentimes, these situations aren't black or white. They are a matter of competing interests and which are meant to be prioritized. So I'd like to read a quote, and actually, like, it's in our report as well, but it's by an academic called Steven Owen, who talks about discussing the idea of enforcement powers for the ombudsman, right? And he says, I quote, "While a coercive process may cause reluctant change in a single decision or action, by definition, it creates a loser who will be unlikely to embrace the recommendations in future actions. By contrast, where change results from a reasoning process, it changes a way of thinking, and the result endures to the benefit of potential complainants in the future." I believe that the ombudsman has the potential to change the way we look at government accountability and transparency in Malaysia. I think as a growing, maturing democracy, there's a lot of work to be done in order to really form strong institutions. But I believe that this could be a catalyst that helps us kind of shift our perspectives of how we view the relationship between civil society and government as well. So in conclusion, the ombudsman's not a solution to all of our problems. It's not a panacea. It's not going to solve all of our problems. But what it is a part of a larger accountability and transparency framework. We believe that with these new ideas, these new proposals, such as parliamentary votes of commissioners, open calls for candidates so that selection is more merit-based, a lot of new initiatives, new ideas could be integrated into the Malaysian system, and this could be the first step. And so C4 Centre is very hopeful, and we are excited to see where this proposal goes. We're excited to work with Bahayu, potentially. But yeah, that in essence, that is our report. Thank you so much for listening to me.
Thank you so much for your presentation, Mr. Prashant. Right now, we would like to go into the Q&A session. So just a bit of housekeeping. For those of you who are participating online, please raise your hand, use the raise hand icon if you have questions. When your name is called, please unmute and ask your question. Alternatively, you can also type your question into the chat box. For those of you who are attending in person here, please raise your hand if you have a question or a comment. Our crew will pass you the mic. Please state your name and your organization before you field your question. Okay, Prish, you can go sit down at the table. Mr. Pushpan, I'd like to invite you to moderate this Q&A session. And we are also actually quite ahead of schedule, so we do have enough time to take quite a few questions. So please, if you have any questions, just ask them.
Good morning, everybody. Any questions? Yes, we have one from Bloomberg.
Yes, Anders from Bloomberg News here. I wonder what kind of background or professional or academic or political that you would like to see for somebody in this kind of role, because obviously the role of an ombudsman needs to be someone with a lot of integrity and that can withstand pressure from various parts of the government. So I'm curious about how you see that playing out and what kind of person ideally you would like to see hold this kind of office.
Okay, a good question. I think more so than any individual, the main thing that I think is important, especially for the Malaysian context, is diversity of experience. So I believe that it's important, yes, for experienced public servants to hold a post, but I don't think that those in the private sector should be excluded either. Again, sure, a legal background might be important, but I don't think it should be definitive. I believe There are very few jurisdictions that mandate having a legal background as a precursor to being an ombudsman. And I don't think that that is a necessary factor. Rather, again, having diversity of experience, diversity of education would create and allow for a more holistic capacity to investigate complaints and assist the government.
Anybody else? Looks like, I think you did a good job that there's no question coming up for you. We have one from Vikram.
Morning, my name is Vikram from UNODC. Excellent report and excellent presentation, Mr. Prashant. I have a question which actually relates to the Swedish model of the Ombudsman. So what we have seen today in your presentation and what we have also read in the media up until now has always been a narrative around restructuring or reforming the Public Complaints Bureau to something more independent or something with broader powers, right? When we talk about ombudsman in Malaysia. Now, if we look at the Swedish model or even the Norwegian model, we see that there are different ombudsmen for different functions. There's one for consumer rights, there's one for gender equality and or rather equality, and then there's one for parliament and whatnot. In your ideal wish list kind of model, would you see the function or actually the culture of this kind of ombuds process being absorbed into the Malaysian civil service and take on different functions similar to the Swedish model? And in line with what you said earlier about constitutionality, to have equal representation for these different offices at the state level as well. And same questions in line with the MA 63 amendments. Thank you.
Oh, does it work? Okay. All right. So 3 different things here. Okay. So the various models, the various different offices, I would say, or different roles that could be assigned to the ombudsman is actually a very interesting and exciting element of this entire exercise, right? We take, for instance, the Commonwealth Ombudsman in Australia, who also holds ex officio posts for a whole host of different acts. So basically, he conducts somewhat merit reviews on immigration issues, foreign student, a bunch of different things, essentially. So what I'm hopeful for, fingers crossed, is this would be a test case almost for an initial office that monitors and resolves public complaints in general about the government officials. And like I said earlier, generally speaking, it should not be merit review. It should focus more on procedural non-compliance. However, if the test case works out and it actually does have a sufficient pickup, I don't see why we can't explore expanding or creating more ombudsman institutions on specific thematic areas, which could even handle more merit-based reviews. You look at some acts. I guess you could talk about perhaps what do you call it? Procurement decisions. Could be an example of a situation where if someone has a grievance, basically what I'm saying is it could be used as a grievance procedure as well, in line with what other jurisdictions are doing. So yeah, very exciting possibilities, but I think we need to start with the test case first and see how that goes. And that's what I view this particular proposal as. In terms of the second question you had, when you say equal representation, you mean do you mean that the state should have institutions that mirror the federal agencies? Yes, I mean, ideally, of course. I mean, Sarawak already has a state ombudsman that was launched late last year. Ideally, all states should have equivalent ombudsman institutions to cover their own public services, because as it stands right now, all but 4 of the states have separate public services, which are completely separate and are not subject to the Public Service Commission at the federal level. And so we have a situation where if the states don't have accountability frameworks, then there is a whole range of potential complainants who would not have adequate redress for their complaints. If you look at PCB statistics over the past 5 years, on average, about 40% of complaints received by the PCB are against state governments and local authorities, your PBTs. So it is a huge gap that would not be addressed and must be addressed. However, we can't ignore the fact that ultimately it is a matter of constitutional law, and it would require extra legal measures of discussion, collaboration, with coordination with the states in order to convince them, I guess, to adopt these measures as well, which is why I think we can learn a lot from other federal jurisdictions like Australia, like Canada. How did they basically collaborate with the states to get states and territories to get them to adopt these measures as well? Good. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Adrian from North-South Initiative. I deal with a lot of labor department, industrial department issues, and also a bit on KDN and even once MACC. I think by now, with your experience, you would already be able to predict how the public service is going to resist these ideas. For me, when I go to even basic things like contract substitution, forging, they will just tell the worker, take it or leave it. In front of us, they can do that. So I suspect that there will be some resistance. What are the points that you think will be a point of resistance from the public service? Thanks. It's an honest question. I'm not saying it for rhetoric purpose. Thanks.
Maybe I can add just a really quick one. I think the objective of today's launching, because we have been speaking about ombudsman all this while. So I think the objective of the launch today is basically put in a little bit more nuances, understanding, conceptualize the idea, so that means civil society and the fourth estate can help us distribute this information and maybe form a pressure group to push for an identity where we look at these issues more seriously. So in that context, that's the purpose of this, to push the agenda and advocacy work out there. But I think you are right. The resistance is already there. There is resistance from oversight mechanisms currently that don't feel comfortable with this approach. That's why we need the mobilization of ideas now to push it up there. So I think in terms of the integrity, Mr. President will answer your question on that point.
I think ultimately any government segment is going to resist increased scrutiny of their actions, because I mean, end of the day, it does increase the responsibility that they hold. Now, I mean, especially when you talk about this in relation to FOI as well, for example, they now have to account for everything that they do, all of their actions. So obviously there's going to be an increased burden on them, which they are going to resist. However, I think that when it comes to our role, I'm speaking about civil society now, our job is, I guess, to kind of convince them that on the balance, this is ultimately good. Mr. Leon mentioned transparency is ultimately cost effective. And that makes sense, right? When we talk about increased scrutiny of public servants, who ultimately are the implementers of government policy, it leads to better decision making. It leads to less wastage of public expenses, which ultimately creates a more efficient government. The machinery of government itself can be uplifted and improved. And so I think when we frame it, we need to frame it in terms of benefits to the government itself, long-term benefits to the government itself. It is going to make you function better. So in the short term, sure, it might make you guys work a bit more, but it has benefits at the end of the day. And so yes, we do expect resistance, but I think when it comes to administrative law reform, we can't avoid it. So it's just a matter of managing it and try to convince them that this is in your best interest as well. Yeah.
Any questions online? No. Okay, one question from the man himself.
Thanks. Just to add to the point that Prashant made now, and an excellent point that I had in his speech, just view the ombudsman and their work, and that they conduct their work in such a conciliatory manner. It's not about walking around slapping wrists and firing people. It's about viewing the system and seeing what actually happened here, and how can we make sure that we don't do it again? How can we improve it for everyone, and for the civil servants, so that they can do their job? And if you work in that way, precisely that you pointed out, there will be a wider acceptance, instead of having an institution that operates on the basis of fear, which is it does not. So, yeah.
I think even now, CSOs now are beginning to understand, to appreciate the fact that how do we incentivize change? You know, we no longer sit down there and say, this is wrong, you must do this, let's fight it. Oh no, I think now the idea now is let's incentivize. How do we engage? How do we find the best path forward to engage every party? So I think that reconciliation nature has to also transcend across the board in terms of our engagement with the government department as well, also our engagement with CSOs as well. I think that formula would have more traction going forward, I think. Yeah, one more question, Stanley.
Check with the Prashant, because I know we did discuss something about the need to also touch the area of whistleblower protection coming under ombudsman. Did you cover that? Did you talk about that? Okay, so what's the position on that actually?
In essence, what we basically what we're calling for is expanding the channels of where you can make disclosure under the Whistleblower Protection Act to also incorporate ombudsman. So you can go to ombudsman offices and make disclosures, protected disclosures, and you will receive whistleblower protection as well. That's the idea of it. So it comes together. Again, so again, to fit the ombudsman within the larger framework, there are a lot of other ancillary amendments that are needed in order to make sure that it is like as effective as possible. But that is, we go into detail in the report.
Thanks, Prashant, because I understand that Bayu is also in the room here. And I think we also look forward that Bayu might also share with us later, because we understand that the government is actually planning. The plan was at least to put the whistleblower protection under ombudsman. And then the bill has been stalled in December last year. So what's actually the plan moving forward? Or what are the whistleblower protection under ombudsman? What will actually be issues that they were actually afraid of? And we would like to understand that in much more detail. And also probably we could actually come up with more suggestions to try to address those concerns. Yeah? Can you use this?
So, are you going to answer? No? Or we later? Okay, we discuss later. Thanks, Stanley. Anything else you guys want to share or want to ask before we're actually been good on time, actually. Yeah. I like this. One? No? Okay, you're putting your hand. I thought you were one. Okay, I'm going to give you all another 2 minutes. Any questions from the online platform? No questions. Anybody from the floor? No comments, no questions. If you want to ask us after this, please approach us later on after the thing is done. So I think we're okay with this. We're done. Thank you so much, everybody.
All right. Hi, guys. Welcome back, everyone. I hope everybody had a good lunch and you're not too full to listen to the next following hours. So without further delay, let me just introduce our first panel discussion of the day, fundamental issues with public service delivery. And for this, we have 3 speakers lined up. But first and foremost, let me just introduce Mr. Pushpan Murugaya, who will be moderating this session. Please take a seat here, Mr. Pushpan. Now to introduce the speakers. First speaker we have on our list is Dato Sutinah Sutan, Board of Director of C4 Center, who is also the former Deputy Chief Commissioner of the Malaysian Anti-Corruption Commission Prevention Division. So, Dato Haja Sutinah binti Sutan started her career in the Malaysia Anti-Corruption Commission MACC in June 1980. Throughout her decades of service, she quickly moved up the ranks as she dedicated her life to preventing corruption. She was formerly the Deputy Chief Commissioner Prevention of MACC from 2010 until her retirement. She is involved in numerous local and international task forces and committees that promote integrity, including the National Integrity Committee on Public Governance as Chief Secretariat, Integrity Committee on Policy, System and Procedure, the National Integrity Plan, the MACC Oversight Group, the Southeast Asian Anti-Corruption Pact, CPAC, the ADB OECD Anti-Corruption Initiatives for Asia and the Pacific, and the International Association of Anti-Corruption Authorities. Dato Sutinah Sutan holds a bachelor's degree in humanities from the University of Science Malaysia. Dato, please take a seat here. Okay. Next, we have Mr. Steven Thiru, Managing Partner of Steven Thiru and Sutan Partnership, and the former President of the Malaysian Bar. With almost 30 years of experience under his belt, Steven represents clients at all levels of the courts. His client base includes corporations from the public utilities, infrastructure and project development, aviation and airlines, banks, charities, financial services, education, media, oil and gas, real estate, and telecommunication sectors. In recent years, Steven has successfully represented and advised clients in a $579 million dispute involving the evaluation and accreditation of the local medical programs and the termination of offshore medical programs, several landmark decisions involving meter tampering, power theft, and fraud, cases involving breach of fiduciary duty by high-level employees, land acquisition matters involving the methodology of calculation for severance damage caused by an acquisition exercise. Steven also served on the Bar Council and was president of the Malaysian Bar from 2015 to 2017. He's a vice president, Australasia, and council member, Malaysia, of the Commonwealth Lawyers Association. He's currently an EXCO member of Law Asia and is currently serving his third term as one of 3 vice presidents of Law Asia for the year 2022 and 2023. Mr. Steven? Thank you. And finally, joining us from online, a representative from Tiada Guru, Fiqah Roslan. Fiqah Roslan was born and raised in Sabah and is passionate about civic engagement and human rights. As a representative of the Tiada Guru Campaign, she advocates for corruption-free and quality education. Her other advocacy work includes enhancing democratic participation among youth through a youth-led organization, Undi Sabah. As an independent journalist, together with all-women journalist colleagues, she co-founded Borneo Speaks as a platform for citizen storytelling with a focus on Sabahan communities. She currently serves as Partnership and Learning Experience Facilitator at Forever Sabah Institute to support the knowing, doing, sharing nexus of Forever Sabah towards Sabah's transition to a diversified, equitable, circular economy. Fiqah is joining us from online. Everybody give a round of applause to Fiqah as well. And now I'll pass it on to Mr. Pushpan to moderate the rest of the session.
Thank you, Brian, and thank you everyone for still. Can we get a better mic? Testing 1, 2. Okay, so thank you again for staying back after lunch, and also we have a nice session going on after this one and also the following session. So I want to quickly start the conversation in the sense of how do we kind of fit in ombudsman within the larger scales of oversight mechanisms and also overview of historical context. So I would like to start with Steven here to share a little bit about the mechanisms that currently there are in the Constitution and how it basically works, and also maybe the shortfalls or the gaps within the system, and perhaps you can share those insights, legal.
Thank you, Chairperson. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Happy to be here to speak, but much of this was in my previous life, so you'll forgive me that I'm a bit rusty on this. I moved on from being the president of Malaysian Bar for the past 6 years. Thought I left that behind, but it keeps coming back to haunt me. All right, I've just got 2 slides to set the, if you like, the backdrop to the legal oversight. And when one speaks about legal oversight, can you hear me at the back there? Yeah, all right. Sometimes you said, no, we can't, but please carry on. In terms of, and we are talking about public servants, we're talking about persons in public service, because you're looking at ombudsman. The ombudsman system generally applies to people in public service, but I'm aware in some jurisdictions it also extends to persons in private employment. Now, I am by and large a private employer, a lawyer, acting for many private employers, and largely or almost not really acting for public servants, though I've done a few. But I think the problems we have in terms of what's the oversight that you need, and what are the problems, and what really I consider fall in between the cracks. All right. So on the one hand, if you're looking at performance of employees, whether in private or public sector, one of the areas where we have the biggest problem, and it's a problem that you may see in the delivery of public services, is performance, job performance. All right. Put it in a different way, in terms of disciplinary problems, is poor performance. All right. And how do you deal with poor performance? Right. That somewhat is not a low-lying fruit, it's the fruit that lies between the low-lying and the high-lying fruit. And that's the difficulty you have always. Because when one speaks of poor performance, there is an entire spectrum, range between very serious poor performance, which borders on what we call gross negligence, clear-cut misconduct, serious misconduct, action can be taken, not a problem. Then at the other end of the spectrum, what we have is really a complaint of inefficiency, right? And that really is maybe the problem that you see more in our public services rather than the other end. The other end is easily dealt with, and I'll show you. There's a well elaborate structure that we have in the federal constitution, in regulations to deal with that. But it's this low-lying fruit, which I think falls in between the cracks, when you have inefficient employees, whether in the private or public sector, in terms of delivery. And how do you handle that? It's not easy to handle because if you take the private sector, whenever there is an issue of poor performance, an employer cannot take immediate action. That's the first point. The entire process is rather labored and prolonged because there's a need basically to tell the employee what is lacking, you're inefficient in this way, and to be quite elaborate and detailed about what is lacking. To then tell the employee how he or she may improve, setting out some sort of a guideline on improvement, then monitoring the improvement, and at particular points, calling the employee in, doing an assessment, and telling the employee that either you're on the right track or not on the right track. And if you're not on the right track, how can you better improve? You can imagine this process is not going to be overnight. It takes anything between 3 to 6 to 9 months sometimes. And you have a low-lying fruit, poor performing employee who is possibly still delivering services at a level which is not acceptable. All right. Now, that is not any different in the public services. You'll also have the same problem. And how do you deal with that? This entire process then comes to head when you go into litigation. So in the cases that I've handled in the industrial court, when you have a poor performance case, the disconnect that you have is the employer saying, I have taken action. So, we've gone through this whole process, 8, 6, 9 months. Employer comes to the conclusion that nothing can be done. We need to discharge in the sense that we need to terminate. It becomes a full-blown dispute in court. You go to court, the employer will say, yes, I did. And this is my objective standard. The court will then look and say that, look, maybe it's not a very objective standard because it came from you. So it's rather subjective. Then the employee will say, yeah, the standards are too high. And invariably, the court will agree with the employee to say the standard, maybe you should have given another month. Maybe you should have advised a bit more. Now, this is not peculiar to private employment. It's the same problem you have in public employment. And that's why inefficiency is difficult to deal with, because when things come to hit, you can't really take any sort of firm disciplinary action to improve the situation. In terms of disciplinary action, now you may have other sorts of what have you, rehabilitation in the sense of employment, making the employee a better employee, all sorts of education and all that. I'm not talking about. I'm talking about a situation where the employer comes to the conclusion that not good enough, inefficient, something needs to be done. Employee comes to the conclusion that actually this is really good enough, and let's have a third party look at it. And the third party invariably agrees with the employee. you're no better off. You're no better off. In terms of the employee's view, you're no better off. You're carrying that. Now, if I show you what we have in the Federal Constitution for public servants, can I just have the first slide? Who's got the clicker? Yeah, right. In the Federal Constitution, we have a very clear definition of who is a person or public servant by the definition of public services. That will be under Article 132(1). And for our purposes, we look at 132(1)(c), people who we consider those who are engaged in the general public services of the Federation. So they're not the police, they're not armed forces, they're not the Education Commission, they are separate. Now, under Article 132(2), we have come up, the Agong comes up with this. He comes up with what is known as a public officer, or rather he actually allows for regulations, which are called the Public Officers Conduct and Discipline Regulations of 1993. And it is a very elaborate set of regulations, rules that sets up what are the different kinds of misconduct. And indeed, you see under Regulation 4, I think C, it also talks about inefficiency and I think lack of industry. Can you imagine? Lack of industry, all right, as a form of misconduct, And then there are procedures. The procedures actually come under, before I go there, who is the disciplining authority is actually generally the Public Services Commission, and that is actually in Article 1391. They are responsible for public services, but in terms of these employees that I'm speaking about, they will really be governed by the Public Services Discipline Board regulations, where in every ministry, in every department, there are regulations and rules setting up a disciplinary board, and a disciplinary appeals board will deal with these problems. All right, and that's actually under Article 1445B of the Federal Constitution, and they set up elaborate procedures about. So we have a legal infrastructure, not a problem. If you're talking about oversight, legal oversight, it's there. All right, you can deal, and you look at a host of misconducts, not a problem. But for your purposes, and if you need to have somebody look into what falls in between the cracks, the first thing you need to identify is what this doesn't deal with. And it deals with that kind of problems I mentioned just now. The so-called inefficiency, where there's a subjective-objective disconnect. Objective, subjective, employer says inefficient. Third party looking at it says, I'm sorry, good enough. But the consumer, the person caught in between, in the private employment situation, the employer says, what's this? It's inefficient. We are not delivering. Our customers, clients are not happy, and yet we have a court saying that it's good enough. And that is going to have a ripple effect. All those who are performing better will say, well, now we can step back, because the court says this is efficient enough. If you now take that and you put that into a public environment, public servants, all right? Same problem. How you deal with that? Are you going to deal in inefficiency in the sense that there is grievance from members of the public that the delivery system is not good enough? And we can see the inefficiency. This is not good enough for us. There must be standards. But when it goes into a real dispute, it falls between. So somebody, somewhere, some mechanism must be there to look into this and find a solution to this. We have not been able to, because of the nature of the problem. The creature itself is a creature that we can't really handle. We have not been able to handle it in the private sector, and the private sector, the public sector is, in my view, no better. All right. I just want to show you another slide, and in terms of procedures, we have. So can it be zoom it a bit? No. Right.
Expand a little bit by each section, maybe.
Sorry.
Just expand it a bit. Yeah.
Just expand a bit. Just to show you that in terms of serious misconducts, not serious misconducts, the Federal Constitution, read with the regulations that I mentioned just now, gives you a step-by-step procedure, giving the employee the right to be heard, what we call natural justice or procedural fairness. All of that is set in stone, if you like. It's there. All right. So not to worry. If you're talking about fairness to the the government, or the employing government, or the public servant, it's all there. They are not going to be in any way shortchanged. Either way, they will get natural justice. Whether they're happy with the result at the end of the day is a different matter altogether. But you cannot say that we have a system that doesn't provide for that. It does. That's not the problem. The problem is what I identified just now. If you can come up with what falls in between the cracks and you impose it here, first of all, you'll not even get into here because somebody looking at it will have difficulty saying as a third party, is this really a misconduct, inefficiency? Can we not deal with it in a different way? And therein starts the problem. The different way does not get dealt with. The problem festers. It becomes the norm, no longer the exception, and everybody's inefficient and everybody's happy about it. All right. So if you're looking at something to deal with the problem, this is the problem. And I'm not entirely sure whether the ombudsman system at that level will be able to deal with it. But I'm here saying to you, after about 30 years doing employment law, that is the problem. All right. So more often than not, when an employer comes to see me on a poor performance case, I'll say it's an uphill battle. It's going to be a very uphill battle. But at the end of the day, you're going to be faced with a third party who's saying, if I put myself in that situation, I may not meet that standard. So touch and go, you're off. Thank you.
Thank you, Thiru. So I think for me, there's two key points to take away from that conversation just now. One is the fact that you also need to really consider the federal constitution, the provisions in there, and also how to harmonize with the application of ombudsman. Whether there is conflict, how to fill in the gaps, the gray areas, how do we identify that? Perhaps it can play a role there. But I also want to raise the issue you mentioned about objective and subjective nature of those conflicts. Maybe this will also go to identifying how do you actually appoint an ombudsman, what criteria you want to set in place so the ombudsman is able to perhaps give a more reasonable or objective look at different kind of objectives or issues. So that can also fall to a different area of how do we identify the frameworks, criteria for appointments of an ombudsman. So the format, let's go through all the sessions first, all the three panelists, then we'll come back with some questions after that. Okay, so I'd like to hand over the next question to Dato Sutinah. My question is very simple. She has been in the MACC, she was in the ACA before, and what are the oversight mechanisms that we have yang ada sekarang, and what is your view of those things?
Terima kasih, Joe. Good afternoon, everybody. I think I used not to have microphone whenever I talk because my voice is loud enough. For the first few minutes, maybe low. But once I get excited, I think next door can hear my voice. All right. How much I want to tell you, depending on how much you ask me. All right. Normally, MACC officer are like that. They don't talk much. But if you ask more questions, more things they will tell you. Okay. Speaking of public sector, just to start with is actually officers of public sector, they are a civil servant. When we talk about servant, you know what servant mean. You do as you are told. If you need to complete a job within a day, do it. But why you complete you take 3 days? There's some people complain, delay. All right. Sometimes delay may cause the laziness of the officer, or maybe the weakness in the system or procedure. But more dangerously is when it is about unawareness of the officer that that the system influence them, and hence the delay occurs. Okay, and they don't do about it. Okay, now in the one thing that I need to inform you also, that a government officer must be loyal and devoted to the Yang di-Pertuan Agong, to the nation, and also to the government. So I used to say I'm still working. Okay, now the government officers are accountable to the government of the day. Okay, so it means to say that I can say more lah than when I was working last time. Okay, now, so if you act in a manner that the government construed as you are against the Agong, you are against the nation or the government, they can take disciplinary action against you under they call it regulation number 49. They can terminate on the spot. Yeah, without giving the right to be heard. This is what scare, especially the head of department. So they take the stand of, might as well I diam lah, rather than say something that people might construe as I'm against the government. That is regulation number 49. Yeah, I really scared because sometimes I just wonder when some issues occurs, our chief to the government, which is KSN, keep quiet. They don't. He doesn't defend the government officer because most of them scared of this section. Yeah. Okay, now, if you follow one case, I think about three or 4 years ago, one of the head of department was terminated suddenly because they thought that he made some statement which is against the government policy. So he was terminated on the spot. Now, speaking of system, rules and regulation and procedures, you name it in the government, they have. Okay, they even have a circular that give a guideline to government officer as to how to handle telephone call. Because, you know, people have been saying that when you make a call to a government officer, then you become like football lah. They get, oh, I extend this line to this guy, and then suddenly you wait and wait, tak ada. And then send another guy, so you become a football lah. Yeah, bola. People kick here and there kan, tak ada, nothing happen. Yeah, that is people still talking about it. Okay. And then KSN came up, one of the KSN came up with no wrong door policy. So the first call, you entertain and provide correct information so that they don't become bola, football. Okay. But then now when the KSN retired, the policy died off. That is another issue in government service. Sustainability, almost zero. Okay, because some government head department, I call this new head, new legacy syndrome. I don't think you have heard of this because I named that. I created that term, new head, new syndrome. So much so that the government officer when they come to know that the chief will be replaced by another guy, then they wait and see lah. You ask them, kita tunggu dan lihat lah what is the policy or the style of this new head. You know, that kind of thing. So they forget about the previous good things, you know, that's happening. Itu satu isu lah ya. Okay. Now, I think Steven dah cakap tadi regarding the conduct, the misconduct under regulation number 4, subsection 2, I think, yeah. That I wrote here that an officer shall not lack efficiency and industry. Kan itu dia. That's why, because this delays, it has been, I think, ever since I joined the public service, that has been the complaint, the public complaint until today. Yeah? Now, as I said earlier, the government, they have all kinds of regulations, circulars, garis panduan, you know, guidelines. But still, you don't see the desired result. The public don't see the desired result. So where has gone wrong? One reason I mentioned earlier about the regulation number 49, Another thing is now I have to relate to the my experience conducting audit on ISO 37001 anti-bribery management system. One of the component of the ISO is on the corruption risk assessment. So when I see the functions, activities of the organization, I can see possibly a lot of high risk corruption area. But they don't mention that in their analysis. So I asked them, why? Dia kata, oh, my boss tak bagi. Don't show this area, high risk area. Then more job. It doesn't happen only in public sector, yeah, in private. So meaning, as early as 80s, when I started my job until today, there's still attitude of the leaders sweeping things under the carpet and become gatekeeper. What to release, what not to release. They don't want to portray their incompetency, or I do not know. For what reason, they know best. Okay. Then secondly is thirdly is I think because lack of monitoring. Yeah, good procedures, good system, good SOP, but when your boss do not monitor or at least semak semula lah, review, then the officer become, you know, slowly dia buat tak tahu. That's why delay still occur. Okay, and I think that's all I need to say about this thing. Okay. I think kalau you ask another question, unit integrity, I will
can.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you, Dato. Thank you, Dato. So I think what I gather from here, give me a round of applause, please. What I gather from here is I think there is a distinct issue where there are rules, regulation in place so far, regulations in place, policies, code of conduct, but looks like it's not happening. The culture is still there. People are sweeping underground. So perhaps they need an outside party to look at and address all these issues. Perhaps that's where the gray areas or the function of ombudsman can raise these issues up without being confrontational. I think the key word is to be able to have a dialogue in terms of change. Now we have another third speaker. Very interesting story which I've been following from day one. It deals with a very important issue of education and children, or more of how they've been deprived of these two, and how it actually affects, how the system affected the lives of some children. And perhaps if by having ombudsman in place, could have prevented the loss of years, the loss of opportunity as well. So I'll give it to Fiqah for you to just share your experiences.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you again for having Tiada Guru on this panel. So yes, again, my name is Fiqah and I represent the Tiada Guru campaign. And for some background, Tiada Guru is a public servant whistleblower movement, notably the only one on this panel, and as far as we know, the only one in Malaysia. The Tiada Guru campaign's roots are based on the case of extreme teacher absenteeism back in 2015. So this is what I believe Mr. Moderator was alluding to earlier. So this case began when senior English teacher Muhammad Jainal Jamran, he stopped teaching his classes at SMK Town Gusi for 8 months. SMK Town Gusi is in one of Malaysia's 10 poorest districts in Kota Belud, Sabah. So what happened was, after this extreme absenteeism case, whistleblower students filed 2 separate public interest litigation suits, and one in 2018 and another one in 2020. And the 2020 case concluded in the middle of last year, 2023, with the High Court finding all 5 defendants, which include the Ministry of Education and the Government of Malaysia, in violation of the Education Act, in violation of the Public Officers Conduct and Discipline Regulations, as well as the highest law in the country. the federal constitution. When this case ran for months at the school with no real attempt at rectification, despite numerous complaints and reports, it became very clear that the problem is much deeper than just teachers skipping class. The problem was, and it is still, systemic. So Tiada Guru, that is why Tiada Guru comprises Ministry of Education whistleblowers on the full range of MOE misconduct. So this means child abuse, sexual harassment, fabricated school reports, leaked exam questions, anything and everything you can imagine under the sun that would happen under the MOE or within the MOE. That is what we aim to blow the whistle on. And these are all issues that stem from the same problem of corruption deep within and throughout our institution, unfortunately. And I believe the two earlier panelists alluded to the same things, that this problem is very real, it exists. A lot of people know about
Oh no.
it, the MACC knows about it, and yet what can we do? And so that is why for Tiada Guru, we believe and we know that empowered whistleblowers are Malaysia's remaining key to escape from complete and utter collapse. And so on the matter of how we would go about doing this, yes, Mr. Moderator was very right in saying that the Ombudsman would hopefully aim to address these key issues and to have kind of a third party looking in and saying, okay, this is what we might be able to do about it. I noted earlier that Tiada Guru is the only whistleblower representative on this panel, and I'd like to reiterate that it's critical to seek and center whistleblower voices, because whistleblowers are the ones who can tell you exactly what is happening and forward to any institution if they don't see how it can directly affect change, and they will have essentially risked their life to an organization that either wouldn't or couldn't fight for them. So we can take the very clear example of 1MDB. Whistleblowers went to the media. Why? Because they had no faith in even the premier anti-corruption prosecuting enforcement body of the country. So now the question becomes, how can this new ombudsman office, this proposed ombudsman, be one that actually works because it's trustworthy, empowered, and efficient? And so there are a number of things that Tiada Guru celebrates about this current Ombudsman Office proposal here. First and foremost being whistleblower protection, which is of course very important, the ability to file public interest litigation as well as investigative powers. But honestly and frankly speaking, from experience, that we would much rather not have as MOE whistleblowers, there are other crucial features that should be embedded as the DNA of what is to be a relevant, effective, and popular people's advocate, more than just a public ombudsman. So more than that, a people's advocate, a peguam bela rakyat. And first and foremost, we strongly believe that it's important that while this proposed ombudsman can investigate, enforcement powers are also crucial. But before I get ahead of myself and before we get ahead of ourselves, we do not mean, of course, absolute powers, but without enforcement powers, unfortunately, we only perpetuate identical government institutions that allowed, encouraged, and then covered up the 1MDB mega scandal. And 1MDB is only one major example of a long line of similar cases. This is one of many obvious reasons why the new proposed ombudsman must have some disciplinary enforcement powers. So the MACC already attempted this balanced approach to work collaboratively with ministries, yes, and it is the same investigate and recommend strategy in today's proposal. MACC strategy, unfortunately, was a failure, and we say this because there are some 500 MACC recommendations that were made after misconduct was found, but unfortunately still zero action taken by ministries. And so the public ombudsman will obviously be weaker than the MECC. Why should we repeat a failed strategy? As whistleblowers, we're extremely sober to the fact that disciplinary commissions, enforcement agencies, attorney generals, ministries, they've totally failed to act against heinous misconduct. And so how might this proposed ombudsman be much different? We fear that whistleblowers will ignore the proposed ombudsman, and even if it offers protection, it'll become another irrelevant and eventually defunct institution, and that is what we do not want. Significant manipulation of ombudsman findings can also very easily happen if ministries alone present cases to commissions. We are wary that the ombudsman may conclude that a certain case is A, B, C, but the ministry may only present B and C to the commission. And so the ombudsman will have no recourse but to complain to parliament, to pretend it will always be friendly to the ombudsman, which is something that we cannot guarantee, and to resort to a decades-long legal case. Commissions themselves are frequently ex-top public servants from the same agency or ministry. And it goes without saying that this is an enormous conflict of interest. And I think this would go back to the first panelist earlier who was saying, even if we appoint ombudsman, what is the appointment process like? What are the criteria needed for the ombudsman appointed? And so this is also a very crucial factor to take into consideration. So while we believe that the public ombudsman can and should be highly trained to take sanctioned, legal, and procedurally pristine disciplinary action, and history shows that this expertise is very much necessary in difficult cases. For example, I think the case of the teacher who was discharged from service due to his phobia of water, who did not want to go to school because he was afraid of having to cross rivers, for example. And this teacher was unceremoniously dismissed, but it turns out that the dismissal was overturned because it was unlawful, because he was not informed with due diligence. And so this is why, yes, we definitely believe that the ombudsman can and should be highly trained.
Sorry, Fiqah, just to interrupt you.
Yes.
I think the slides are not running. I think you are in control of your slides.
Yes, although honestly, at this point, I didn't want to.
Okay, but I saw some interesting
time.
points from the slide I would like to see. I mean, up to you. Yeah.
Sure. I just didn't want to go too much overtime into that.
No, it's okay.
All right. Yes, so this is the case that I was talking about. So in dealing with these cases, for example, it is very much necessary to have this training. And so this would be one of the very crucial criteria in appointing an ombudsman or a panel of ombudsmen, even for this proposed ombudsman. And so at minimum, we believe that the ombudsman should at least be able to take punitive actions such as fines. These can be for misconduct, investigation interference, whistleblower harassment, and these should be taken directly from the offending public servants and or the ministry itself. So then there is a clear trail of accountability. And at minimum, we also believe that the public ombudsman should be able to present its investigation directly to commissions, bypassing ministries who were already supposed to act in the first place without actually taking the action, and thus another clear trail of accountability. In terms of, so yes, going back to what I was saying earlier, we are not proposing that the ombudsman have absolute powers. It should not have absolute powers, but definitely some enforcement powers. So for example, initial disciplinary actions, but any final action can and should still be appealed to commissions. And again, another clear trail of accountability following that action. Who made the decision will be clear. And by all means, we absolutely agree that ministries can and should act first with disciplinary action. And this is what they should already be doing anyway. The only reason the public ombudsman acts is because action has not been taken. So we reiterate that recommendations to ministries are ineffective. And again, looking at the extreme teacher absenteeism case, the school principal knew, the PPD knew, the JPN knew, the ministry knew, everybody knew about this teacher not attending class. It went on, dragged on to 8 months, and yet nothing. No enforcement for this public ombudsman is a toothless tiger. So other recommendations we would float would be to offer restitution directly to victims. So this would be in monetary form, allow to give public honors and rewards to whistleblowers. And this is something that MACC is doing and has been doing, but how effective is it? This kind of people's advocate models already exist in Sweden and Finland, for example. And as we always say, adapt to suit the Malaysian context. But what I'm also saying is that this is within reach, and it's because it's standard practice, just not for us yet, but it can be. What we've realized with Tiada Guru is that Malaysians know exactly what is happening on the ground. It's like an open secret. And in fact, they often chime in with their own experiences, be it with MOE misconduct or any public service misconduct. What's peculiar is that when these grassroots realities travel up from the ground to departments, ministries, or even through CSO sometimes, and we may even be guilty of this ourselves, the issue tends to get watered down. And so the potent on the ground truth becomes further and further disconnected from the ground zero reality. And so what is needed is a strong, unified voice making strong, substantial demands. So we think and we believe that this robust people's advocate model for the Malaysian Ombudsman is one of those demands. So that is all from me. Terima kasih, Kotohuadan, Maksubul, and thank you.
Thank you, Fiqah. It's very interesting. A round of applause. So I think we can gather, even from this discourse here, in a small group here, we can see there are divergences in terms of what needs to be put in place, what is necessary. And looking from Fiqah's experience from Sabah's case, you can see why there is a need or emphasis to have perhaps some form of enforceability of the rules. Maybe suggestion could be not a full spectrum of enforcement rules, but perhaps maybe suspension, halting of your salary in the meantime, why investigation going on. So maybe to that extent, there could be a leverage how to implant that kind of mechanism within the system. So I'm not sure. It's again opening up us for other areas to consider that is necessary in order to take a bigger scope of issues. Now, before I leave the questions to the floor, I just want to ask Dato Sutinah, since you allow us to ask you a question, a little bit sensitive, I hope it's okay with you. I want to know actually, it's looking at the the current MACC head who had got a bit of issues last year with the share issues and the issue of accountability, where we have 5 oversight mechanisms within MACC itself. But I don't see any kind of accountability or a kind of activity that was trying to solve the problem. Maybe Dato can share what other mechanism could have worked, or would ombudsman, this particular instance, be another avenue to look at this kind of issues?
Yeah. I would like to suggest that the ombudsman do something about it. Now, it is the policy of the MACC that they will investigate anyone without fear or favor, regardless of status and so on. That will include also MACC officers, right? So I just wonder why, when it comes to the chief of the MACC, that this thing does not happen. I think from this experience, that shows that we need an independent body to look into it, because you have mentioned about the 5 oversight body that look after the operation of the MCC, not even the select committee on anti-corruption at parliament level. All quiet. No one dare to say, no one dare to comment, because he is the chief of the MACC. So I think the hope of the people, because people, I face a lot of questions on this, which I could not answer. Right? So the public wants to know, if it does not warrant investigation, say the reason. at least you satisfy the public. But everybody keep mums. So hoping, and the interested party hoping that over time people will forget about it. Okay. Can I add another issue? Now, we are having this, you remember about the Bangkok issue, Teo Bangkok issue, right? So now, yes, an investigation took place. But then it is the inside people who conducted the investigation. I think this is some form of conflict of interest. Let an independent body investigate. Then they will give a fair report and finding, right? If I think there are a few cases where especially police and the MCC, they themselves took the initiative to investigate from within, from inside. Then people still not satisfied. They want more answers, because people, they know law, especially people like Steven. So you have a lot of questions in your mind. So does other members of the public. So it's good to have an independent body to look into this. Don't let the department to investigate their own officers, especially the senior one.
Okay. Thank you, Dato. No, just one question for Thiru. I just want to address this issue. The issue is this. As mentioned by Fiqah, she wants to have some form of enforceability there, right? Legal punitive element. Now, we have said in our report that, look, you have that, if you want to have that, you might have in conflict with constitutional laws or regulations out there in place. So in your opinion, from a legal perspective, would you be in favor of having those powers within Ombudsman?
Good question. I don't think it offend, I can't think how it will offend the federal constitution. You can have provisions like this where punitive elements are included, and Fiqah is absolutely right. Otherwise, it's just going to be a set of a collection of platitudes and with no teeth. There must be some teeth. But I would look at it this way. Don't reach for the stars yet, because that would be a deal breaker. It will be seen by many of your opponents, and it'll be used to actually block this. So you may wish to start with something less than an extreme fine or so on, some other form of punishment, but there must be a punitive element. There's no two ways about it. Something that is with teeth, but don't go for the extreme. But I can't, for the life of me, I can't see any legal prohibition to that.
One question for Fiqah. Fiqah, you talked about this punitive element. As I just mentioned this now, maybe a possible simple, addition to the punitive element is, for example, like we suspend the teacher, or we withhold his salary while pending investigations or pending a complaint. Would that kind of punitive element kind of solve or help in your particular case?
I don't believe that it would have solved the case, but it would definitely show some commitment towards upholding good governance, towards upholding their statutory duties. Because, for example, what happened with this teacher was no action was taken at all. Even now, after the judgment has been made, the MOE, the government, did not appeal the decision at all. And in fact, the teacher is still teaching to this day. And as far as we know, he has not suffered any form of punishment at any level since it started in 2015.
Sorry, Fiqah, I'm also quite infuriated because I don't understand the logic of a teacher who doesn't come and teach for many, many months. It is still being employed by the government to teach again in the same place, I suppose, which I think there is something majorly wrong with the whole process. Something is seriously wrong there.
Agenda, which is the second panel for today. which is the discussion on ombudsman institutions in practice. And we have panelists from Austria, Serbia, and Kenya. Without further ado, I would like to introduce to the stage Arif Hamizan, our Policy and Program Coordinator. Arif, take it away from here.
Test. Okay. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for staying. And I've been given the privilege, I think, of introducing this really esteemed panel that we have. We've spoken quite at length about the challenges and the potential obstacles to implementing an ombudsman here in Malaysia. But now we have the opportunity to hear some sharings from our guests, who I'll be introducing shortly, who actually work in ombudsman institutions in other jurisdictions. And yeah, I'm very excited to hear what they have to share. I'll introduce our panel. Firstly, we have Mr. Iain Anderson, who was appointed as the Commonwealth Ombudsman from 1st August 2022 for a 5-year term. As the Commonwealth Ombudsman, he's also the ACT, Defence Force, Immigration, Law Enforcement, Private Health Insurance, Overseas Student, VET Student Loan, and Postal Industry Ombudsman, a wide range there. He has over 31 years of experience in the public service, where he has developed and implemented transformational change across a wide range of legal and social policy areas, including the Commonwealth civil justice and criminal justice systems, family law, native title, royal commissions, and Australia's territories. His experience in the Australian public service includes roles with the Australian Government Solicitor, the Australian Customs Service, the Australian Taxation Service, and the Attorney General's Department. He also holds a Bachelor of Economics and a Bachelor of Laws from the University of Sydney. Welcome, Iain. Secondly, we have Mr. Luka Glušac, who is a research fellow at the Institute for Philosophy and Social Theory, University of Belgrade. Before joining this institution, he worked as the program manager at DCAF, which is the Geneva Center for Security Sector Governance, senior advisor of Serbia and National Institutions. And his recent research and policy advice focuses on the institutional design of so-called fourth branch institutions, particularly ombuds institutions and anti-corruption agencies, which is very relevant to our work today. His research has appeared, among others, in Human Rights Law Review, Journal of Human Rights Practice, and also he has recently published a book titled Leaving No One Behind, Leaving No One Unaccountable, which explores the nexus between ombuds institutions, good security sector governance, and Sustainable Development Goal number 16. His training is in political science, international security, and security studies, all degrees from the University of Belgrade. And finally, we have Ms. Isolina Kinyua, who is an advocate of the High Court of Kenya with 13 years of post-admission experience and is currently serving as the Chief Legal Officer with the Commission on Administrative Justice, also known as the Office of the Ombudsman. Beyond traditional legal realms, she is a fervent advocate for alternative dispute resolution, where she holds a certification as a mediator. She also specializes in matters on human rights and access to justice, and holds both an LLB in law and a master's in international trade and investment laws. Aside from her legal work, Ms. Isolina Kinyua also serves as the governance and ethics director for the Rotary Club of Westlands. So welcome all three of you to today's discussion. Really happy to meet all of you and looking forward to what you have to share. Just to give some context again to the discussion today, we're looking at what the tangible benefits of the improvement of public service delivery would be, especially in terms of government accountability and transparency, and how these have materialized from the utilization and the implementation of ombudsman institutions in other jurisdictions, and how we might look to taking some of the best practices as we develop our own here in Malaysia. So without further ado, I would like to invite Mr. Iain Anderson to maybe share some of your experiences with us. Over to you.
Thank you, and Selamat Tinggal Hari. It's a pleasure to be here today. First slide. So ombudsman institutions, the model of the Ombudsman goes back to Sweden in 1809, but actually across cultures and across history, there have been many similar models of a body or a person or an entity that can hear grievances from the community about government. 1962, the first ombudsman outside Scandinavia was set up in New Zealand, and then in the early 1970s, most Australian states created their own ombudsman, and my office, the Commonwealth Ombudsman, commenced operations in 1977. The slide points to the European Commission's 2019 Venice Principles on the Ombudsman Institution, which have also now been picked up in the United Nations General Assembly Resolution 75186 of 2020. They note that ombudsmen play a very important role in protecting and promoting the rule of law and human rights. Importantly for Malaysia, there is no standard model of ombudsman. It's a matter for a state as to what sort of ombudsman they actually want to create. That said, there are some important hallmarks for an ombudsman. It needs to be independent, impartial, having the discretion to choose how and when to act, and it needs to have appropriate investigative powers. Some other hallmarks, tenure. Security of tenure is important. The recommended term is a single term of 7 years, that you should be appointed after a publicly advertised merit-based appointment process, and that you have high moral character, integrity, and appropriate professional expertise and experience. Noting that the slide points to the Australian states having an ombudsman, Australia, like Malaysia, is a federation. I actively work together with the state and territory ombudsman. We consult, we share insights, we share our reports with each other. I also have a statutory power to do joint investigations with state ombudsmen if there's an issue that involves both a state agency and a Commonwealth government agency. Next slide, please. In Australia, the Commonwealth Ombudsman was set up following bipartisan reform. So both major political parties agreed that at the federal level, we needed an administrative law system because prior to this, if you wanted to challenge an action of the federal government, you could only go down the path of going to court under quite limited prerogative writs. So seeking to compel something to happen or to injunct something from happening. And that's a really limited and expensive way of seeking review. So what was recommended was to create a federal court to have broader judicial review, a federal tribunal to have merits review, and for complaints and grievances about maladministration, a federal ombudsman. And as you can see on the slide, recommendations by experts were accepted. Parliament then passed those relevant laws, and the 3 tiers of the administrative law system commenced operation in 1976 and 1977. Those expert committees particularly thought about the need to balance administrative experience and efficiency. You don't want to have too many forms of review because that could bog down the civil service, was one concern. But at the same time, there needed to be effective and efficient and accessible justice for individuals. There was some musing by the experts. Was the need to create these bodies because errors were widespread? They thought, no, errors were not necessarily widespread, but drawing on experience of New Zealand, for example, where the Ombudsman had found that typically 20% of matters of complaints were upheld, clearly errors were occurring, and so there needed to be this system of administrative review. Next slide, please. In terms of role and powers, my primary role is to investigate complaints from people who believe they've been treated unfairly, and that's unfairly, unreasonably, improperly discriminatory, unlawfully, or otherwise wrong in all the circumstances. And that's an important part of my mandate, that my act says, or otherwise wrong in all the circumstances. So I've got the ability to range very broadly in assessing whether I think someone's been treated wrongly by a government agency. In addition to the functions I have that were mentioned in my introduction, I actually have 17 different statutory functions, and the government has recently announced they'd like to give me an 18th. And I should say, my experience is it's not an impediment to have more than one statutory function, providing you're appropriately resourced each time you get given a new statutory function. In itself, it means that my office is quite large, and it gives me more capacity to move resources around to particular issues as I see fit. But importantly, you need to get given the resources each time you get given a new function. The essence of all my different statutory functions is the same. It's about holding agencies to account and providing assurance to both Parliament and to the community that agencies are acting properly and that where they're not doing the right thing, that they are, as I said, being held to account. And generally, the powers in my Act can be used across all of those different statutory functions. Importantly, I can compel the provision of information and documents. I can compel people to come before me and give evidence on oath. I act confidentially, but I can also report publicly, including to Parliament. Next slide, please. In terms of who can complain, importantly, my Act doesn't define who can complain. It simply defines what complaints can be about. So matters of administration in an entity that's within my jurisdiction, but anyone in the community, and in some cases outside Australia, can complain to me about actions or inactions of a government agency that's within my jurisdiction. People can complain anonymously, but we advise them, of course, that might make it harder for us to investigate and certainly to report back to them if it's anonymous. Next slide, please. I mentioned that my jurisdiction is about matters of administration. So I can't investigate actions of ministers, proceedings in Parliament. I can't investigate the actions of judges and magistrates when they're conducting themselves as courts, and I can't investigate in public service employment matters. But that said, it's very easy to find a matter of administration. So it's a very broad jurisdiction. And when I am investigating, if I form a concern that something has been done that's unlawful, unfair, unreasonable in terms of a matter of administration, I then have the power to make recommendations that include recommending that the law should be changed or that policy should be changed. So my ability to recommend things is not limited to matters of administration. It actually extends to the law itself. We receive some 25,000 complaints a year and around 35,000 contacts from people. Many people come to us and they're actually out of jurisdiction. So in a federation, not everyone has a great understanding of which levels of government they should be going to with which concerns. That's okay. We can refer people to another jurisdiction or to another entity. We frequently refer people back to the agency that they've complained about as well, because the agency has the power to change its decision. So we think it's important to at least, first of all, say to the agency, here's my concern, are you willing to address it? The sorts of outcomes that are obtained, frequently it's as simple as a better explanation of why an agency did or didn't do something. Public service agencies in Australia can always improve the way in which they communicate. But there could also be a waiver of a debt or a payment of a benefit. And importantly, an apology is often an acceptable outcome as well. I don't have the power to impose a remedy. I can only make recommendations. But my experience is that the recommendations are almost invariably accepted and implemented that my office makes. We do follow up agencies to make sure that they are in fact implementing them properly. And the fact that I can publicly state my recommendations, publish my reports and require them to be tabled in Parliament means that an agency that does not agree to or implement one of my recommendations has to then publicly explain itself. Next slide, please. We work very closely with other integrity agencies. There's a list there. I'll particularly mention the National Anti-Corruption Commission and the Australian National Audit Office because they both have a similar jurisdiction. They're looking at the whole of the Australian public service. And so it's important that we actually put our heads together and we say, what are the risks that you're seeing? What are the cultures in different agencies? What are the issues that you're looking at? So we avoid duplication, but we can potentially also amplify each other's actions and have a greater impact working collectively. There are occasions where my office has also taken action in unison with, for example, the Australian Human Rights Commission, issuing joint statements to highlight a particular issue touching on human rights. Next slide, please. So in terms of the outcomes, I've listed a few relatively recent outcomes. Housing ACT, they were seeking to force 337 public housing tenants to move away from where they were living. I did an investigation, we released a report. Within 5 days, the government had publicly apologised and suspended that program of forced relocation of public housing tenants. Defence of Use Reparations Scheme, that's a scheme that I play a particular role in relation to. My recommendations have seen $85 million paid out by the Defence Department in reparations to people who were abused while serving in the Australian Defence Forces. Similarly, my recommendations have seen $205 million in debts waived that related to over 13,000 students who had been improperly having a debt imposed upon them. There's a scheme called the Compensation for Detriment Due to Defective Administration scheme. The slides, I've got that wrong, sorry, it's defective administration, not defence administration. And that's a scheme where anyone can complain against any Commonwealth department, and millions of dollars of compensation are paid out every year in relation to claims on this scheme. And it was very heavily influenced by a report of one of my predecessors that recommended such a scheme because prior to that, it was very hard for people to get compensation. And this is an administrative scheme that provides ready access to compensation. Next slide, please. Some other broader outcomes, noting that Sweden set up the first ombudsman, but there are now more than 200 ombudsmen around the world. Globally, it has been found to be an effective institution and a way to hold people to agencies to account. In Australia, certainly the 47 years of my office has seen a very embedded idea now that people have a right to complain without reprisal to an independent agency. And when I look at the reports of my predecessors, particularly the first Commonwealth Ombudsman, it was common for them to be greeted with surprise. Why are you telling me to change something? But now the response of agencies is, yes, we will do something. We will change our practices. We agree we've treated people wrongly. So myself and my predecessors have certainly observed a very significant cultural change in how the Commonwealth Public Service engages with the public and respects the public. So I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Iain. Before we move on to Luka's presentation, I'd just like to pick up on a couple of things that you might have mentioned. You mentioned that your scope of investigation is perhaps going to be added or increased. And you mentioned about your office being appropriately resourced. Just really briefly, what does it mean to you that the office is appropriately resourced, perhaps in terms of cost or also in terms of the human assistance that you might require? What does that look like?
Well, I suspect no ombudsman globally would say that they have as many resources as they would really need. But I have 280 staff. I have a budget of around $45 million a year. And so that helps me carry out my 17 different functions.
Wonderful.
But it's always a point where I get asked regularly by people in Parliament, should I have more money? And I engage with the Attorney General in the Commonwealth Government as well, and engage in that process of explaining and justifying why I need resources.
Thank you so much. I'm not sure if you heard, but I think there was an audible gasp in the audience when you said those numbers. Something for us to think about, perhaps. Great. Thank you so much, Iain. We will get back to you. Next, I'd like to invite Luka to share a little about your work with the Ombudsman around the world. Go ahead.
I hope that you can see the slides.
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you very much, Arif, and thank you for having me. As you mentioned, my presentation will be informed by my own experience of working in the Serbian Ombudsman Office, but also working with more than 20 or 25 different ombuds institutions throughout the world. First of all, kudos for this report. I think you did a really fantastic job in applying the ombuds concept and international good practices to the local context, which is of critical importance, I believe, for the ultimate success of any new institution, including ombuds institution. I will also, try also to echo some of the great points that Iain made. Regarding both in terms of the history of ombuds institutions, but also their comparative development. He really, rightly noticed that originally the concept came from Sweden, and then as it evolved in the last 200 years, obviously there are different motives that motivated different countries to establish ombuds institutions. I put here on the slide several underlying motives, but which are by no means mutually exclusive. But we can follow that trend from having an ombuds institution, these first generation ombuds institutions, which were established to address individual maladministration cases, but then also switched also as the important role as a sort of say quality control mechanism over entire public administration. So the oversight role of procedures, practices, and policies, and that influence of ombuds institutions for more systemic issues has been quite noticeable in the last 20 or 30 years. One important trend, which is I think important just to notice here, is that from late 70s with Portugal and Spain, we have that the second generation ombuds institutions which have been created in the process of constitutional reforms, in the process of democratizations, which are have ultimately led to with the goal to protect the rights of citizens by creating more effective mechanisms for complaint handling, but also a number of ombuds institutions throughout the world has received an explicit mandate to protect and promote human rights. And these two trends, so today in most of Europe, most of Latin America, and important pockets of Africa and Asia, we have these human rights ombuds institutions, and that's also why the reason why the Venice Commission of the Council of Europe, with their own a set of Venice Principle and ombuds institutions, emphasize this role of ombuds institutions in protecting human rights. But to be honest, so in some countries, the motive were systemic issues. In some, the motives were democratizations, but in many countries, it was really the particular contextual reasons that have motivated the establishment of the ombuds institution. So public scandals, grave human rights violations, and so on. But irrespective of the model, whether it is only so to say the maladministration ombuds institution or human rights ombuds institutions, we have seen that inflation of ombuds institutions, receiving additional mandates. Iain mentioned 17 mandates. Throughout the world, particularly, we have ombuds institutions which were receiving mandates to fight corruption, to oversee the laws on access of information, such as the case with the Commission on the Ministry of Justice in Kenya, but also to oversee and to monitor the implementation of different UN conventions, such as against torture or the UN Convention on the Rights of the Persons with Disabilities. What is important really here to emphasize that irrespective of the concrete model, but also irrespective of diversity of mandates received, all ombuds institutions aim to contribute to improved public service delivery, government accountability, and transparency. Whatever, to be honest, is the context of creating ombuds institutions, I think it's fair to notice that this is a generalization, but I think we can safely say that nobody likes being controlled, and then especially in different pockets of the world, also the research shows that public administrations are known to be formalistic, inefficient, and rigid, and also this is the part of I think about a cultural change that also Iain mentioned, this changing the perception but also professional ethos of public administration, of public servants, trying to instill this change in professional conduct, that delivering public service is not a favor to citizens, it is a public service that is there for the citizens. And I think this has to be changed on both sides, both in terms of how the public administration understands its own job, but also what are the expectations of citizens vis-a-vis public administrations. This is not a very optimistic title of the slide. Failure is always an option, but really it is. And we have witnessed this throughout also the world. An ombuds institution is really doomed to fail, if it acts as a government agent, and this should be avoided. The main criteria, conditio sine qua non for the ombuds institution is that it has to be independent. If it's not independent, it's not an ombuds institution. So it's a so to say a leitmotif of ombuds institutions. Also, it should not act as an NGO. as a civil society organization. To be honest, what C4 is doing is a perfect example of what civil society organizations should do to support, public discussion around, creating a better public administration, a better oversight system over the different government agencies and entire public administration. As mentioned, in many jurisdictions, ombuds institutions are overwhelmed by additional mandates. I think Iain really, emphasized this. This is really fine if you're giving enough sources, financial, but also particularly human resources, because with these additional mandates, these are really particularly sometimes technical mandates. If you don't have a technical staff really understanding these issues, you'll be in trouble. So these additional mandates always goes together with sufficient resources. Again, what is sufficient is very difficult to measure, but just one general rule is that your budget should be always either the same or ideally increasing every year to allow ombuds institutions to operate properly. So what are the main preconditions and to have a successful ombuds institution? Usually we say that ombuds institution is ad personam institution. It's basically a person, it's a one person acting as an institution, and then you have a staff, you have office, you have secretariat, however it is called in different jurisdictions, to support that one person or several person, if it's a collective decision-making body, really to perform and discharge these mandates. And this is really what is important, that entire appointment process, but then also particularly also the dismissal process of office holder is really clearly defined. And again, I think the C4 report did a good job in really laying the main legal also preconditions in that way. I mentioned again knowledgeable staff coming from various backgrounds, because when you introduce ombuds institutions, you need to have a really a good staff understanding both how public administration works, but also how different also mechanisms, more traditional oversight or governance mechanisms work. Again, resources, and I think we cannot emphasize this enough, that optimal material resources, but also human resources are essential. Again, independence, and this is also important. I can speak later on more about independence, about importance of having institutional, functional, personal, financial independence. There are 4 different aspects, but if you're lacking even one of them, you will not be the institution will not be really independent. And then I really want to underline unhindered access to documents, people, and premises. The access to information, access to classified information also is really of critical importance. If an ombuds institutions cannot access documents, people, and premises, it is really it cannot really do its job. And this is of really critical importance to lay down very clearly in the legislation, also the obligation of all public servants, public officials to cooperate. So maybe, and that really is the case. The ombuds decisions are not legally binding, but the duty to cooperate should be legally binding. And I think this maybe this is really important to underline and put it very clearly in the law. Just as a last slide, couple of points deriving from various comparative experiences, especially in the early stage of setting up ombuds institutions. I have worked in Serbian ombuds institution it was just established. I started working there in 2011. It started to work in 2008 basically. So it was in a very early stage, and then having the strategic planning, setting the right milestones was of critical importance of building the institution, building its own public profile, but also, working with public administration and both with public administration and people, to actually get to know this new institution. It was completely new in the Serbian system. So we had to educate both public and work with public administration to make this institution work and really to have started to gain roots in the entire system. Picking the right battles really, I think, research also shows this, that is of critical importance, to build your own institutional credibility. Because, reason more because, the ombuds recommendations are not legally binding. So they have to be, evidence-based, fact-based. And this is the main thing, how the ombuds institution build its own credibility. And this is also, why ombuds mistakes are so very expensive, because if you can build your credibility with tens and tens reports, really strong reports, but if you publish one report which is not fact-based, if it's not evidence-based, if it can be disputed easily, then your credibility crashes in a moment. And we also have seen this also in comparative practice as well. And finally, I think again, kudos for the C4 report about you're introducing ombuds institution is the main job is how to really integrate it into already existing system. What mandate should be given to ombuds institutions, what mandate should stay with already existing institution. Malaysia already have really well established anti-corruption commission, human rights commission, enforcement agency integrity commission. So from given the fact that you on one side you already have a well-developed system for the existing commission, I think it's of critical importance to also build partnership between these different mechanisms on those issues and questions that they can work together. It's much easier actually to work together. Also, Serbian case, for example, in Serbia, ombuds institutions has really strong ties with the commissioner on the access to information of public importance and personal data protection. Many activities were done together, and this really, creating synergy proved to be of great importance, and it really helped the ultimate success of some of strategic success of some of the also individual actions that these two institutions perform together. So I'll stop here and thank you. I'm looking forward to any questions.
Thank you, Luka. I think, yeah, thank you so much for, I think, what has been a really thorough overview of the considerations for us to think about when we are implementing our own institution here. I think also something which jumps out at me from your presentation is this idea that the Ombudsman is not simply, or at least our efforts are not simply about passing a law, but it's about building an institution, and that itself takes a lot of time, a lot of planning, and the setting of milestones. So really things to think about for us. One question before I move on to our final panelists, perhaps just really briefly. You mentioned that in many countries, ombuds institutions emerge in the context of public scandals which have occurred. Are there any specific examples which come to mind, and how has the implementation of such an institution perhaps improved public service delivery afterwards?
Well, yeah, this happened in many jurisdictions. Also, in many cases, it was the public scandals, for example, that ultimately resulted in giving ombuds institutions also additional mandates. For example, this often case, for example, scandals, for example, with bullying casing or even deaths, for example, in the military barracks. So in the military ranks, and then, for example, we have in South Korea with Human Rights Commission, where they established so to say a military ombuds institutions within Human Rights Commission because of the scandals in the military. Also, you have, for example, some of the public scandals also motivated the countries also to transform or to reform ombud schemes. For example, that happened in the UK also with the military ombuds institutions. So it is not only just establishing ombud institutions; it is reforming, entire ombud scheme or grievance mechanisms, and then either creating a new institution, creating new mechanisms. But again, just to re-emphasize this, we have to be very careful in when to create a new institution, when to add a mandate to already existing institutions. But then again, only if enough resources are then allocated, for these additional mandates to be properly discharged.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Luka. And now on to our final panelist. I'd like to invite Ms. Isolina Kinyua to share with us your presentation. Over to you.
Thank you very much. My name is Isolina. I am here on behalf of our chairperson, Honorable Florence Kajuju. She had other engagements, and I believe that I will be able to represent her ably. So the Kenyan Ombudsman is called the Commission on Administrative Justice. Am I audible?
Sorry?
Am I audible enough?
Yes, definitely.
Okay, so just briefly, the establishment and the structure of the commission is that the commission is a creature of our Kenyan constitution, that is under Article 59 of the Kenyan Constitution, and the Constitutive Act, which is the Commission on Administrative Justice Act 2011. So it is a constitutional body anchored under the Constitution and has all the independence of a commission. It has two mandates, and the first mandate is to oversee the enforcement of administrative justice under the CAJ Act, and the right of access to information under the Access to Information Act. This is the mandate that the commission was given in 2016, and which has actually helped the commission even in the performance of its original mandate of maladministration, in the sense that it has helped the commission to access information, because as we'll see in the presentation, is that the Access to Information Act has an enforcement mechanisms that you can even access, you can even go to court. So the commission is ended by the chairperson and two commissioners, where one serves as the vice chairperson, and the other one is the commissioner, who also doubles up as the commissioner in charge of Access to Information Act. The recruitment of the commissioners is very competitive, and that goes through the parliament and through the office of the president. And they serve for a term of 6 years, one term and a durable term of 6 years. There is a secretariat that is ended by the CEO. As you know, Kenya is a devolved government where we have the national government and the county government. So the headquarters of the commission is based in Nairobi, but then in view of the devolution aspect that came with the enactment of the constitution in 2011, the commission has been able to establish 6 branches across several counties, 36 counties. And we are hoping that as the resources becomes available, the commission will be able to have its presence in the 47 counties of the Kenyan government, so that then you're able to reach the common citizens down there with their services. There's something in Kenya that we call Huduma Desk, and that is where we have, Huduma is service in Kenya. So we have service centers in various counties, and where the commission is not able to establish then an office, then we normally put a desk in the service centers that people can come there and their complaints are received and they reach the commission. So briefly, the history of the Kenyan Ombudsman can be traced in 1971, where there was a commission of inquiry that recommended the need for an establishment of an independent office or an ombudsman. And this was mainly due to the need to address poor service delivery in the public sector, which was just due to institutional failures and poor work ethics. And it was felt that those are not complaints that can be handled by the courts. So then that is how then we came up with the Public Complaint Standing Committee. So the challenge with the Public Complaint Standing Committee is that it was not anchored under any legislation or legal framework. It was just a committee under the Ministry of Justice, which then was subject to the control and budgetary and all the things were being then managed by the Ministry of Justice. So then there was no independence of an ombudsman office, and then that quest is what led now to the establishment of the Ombudsman of Kenya. So as I have said there, we have two mandates, interest of maladministration, which is the primary mandate of the commission to address all forms of maladministration, promote good governance and efficient public service delivery. And towards this end, then the commission carries that mandate through investigations and inquiries. So that once a complaint is made, the commission will proceed with an inquiry. If there's need for investigation, then the commission will proceed and carry out the investigations. And in carrying these functions, then the commission is required to report to the National Assembly biannually on the complaints that it has investigated and the action that it has taken on the same. On the other mandate, which is a promotion of access to information, as I've said, this was a mandate that was given to the commission in 2016, and it was just out of the realization that it is very hard for members of public when they seek for information from public entities and certain private bodies that then deal with matters that are of public interest to get that information. So the commission was given that mandate then so that it's able to request and compel public bodies and certain private institutions to provide any information that is of public interest when it is required. And just to hand in the mandate of the commission is that there is a bill that is in Parliament, the Whistleblowers Protection Bill, which then seeks also to hand the mandate of protection of whistleblowers to the Commission on Administrative Justice Act, to the commission, so that because even right now, without that mandate, the commission has been dealing with various cases of whistleblowers protection, but then there's no legal framework to regulate or to guide how the commission is going to handle it. So we are hoping that once the bill is passed and becomes into law, then the commission will be able to deal with cases of whistleblower protection in a regulated framework, because you also understand that you cannot separate issues of when you're dealing with whistleblowers and the mandates of ombudsmen. They are intertwined and written in some sort of a way. So when it comes to governance and public service, the role of the commission comes in to ensure that there is service delivery and diagnosis of systematic failures and weaknesses, access to justice through complaints handling, capacity building in the public sector. And in this hand, the commission, since it came into place, what the commission has been doing, it has been helping public institutions, both at county and national level, to have their own complaints redress mechanism, so that the institutions are able to handle most of the complaints at the institutional level before they're escalated to the commission. And to that end, the commission requires at the end of every year, the public institutions are meant to report to the commission on what they have done, the complaints that they have received at the institutional level, how they have handled them, and they are issued with a certificate at the end of every year to show that they are compliant, and the ones that are not compliant, then the report is given to the National Assembly. Constitutionalism and human rights. The Commission also acts as a watchdog to ensure that there's transparency and accountability in matters of public delivery services. Enforcement of national values and principles in governance as per the Constitution, and access to information. In carrying out the mandates of the Ombudsman, the policy direction is to enhance administrative justice and access to information with 4 strategic themes: resolution of public complaints, which is the core mandate, oversight and enforcement of access to information, public education, awareness and visibility, institutional strengthening and capacity building. And the Commission has departments basically to deal with. There's a complaints department, there's an access to information department, there's a public education and awareness department, and there's a strategy department of the Commission. So the powers of the Commission are set out in the Commission on Administrative Justice Act and also in the Constitution, but the Commission has the same powers as the court to issue summons or to order the attendance of any person before the Commission and to produce any documents. It can also require that the statements to be given under oath, can compel production of documents, it can conduct searches and seizures of documents, but with court orders. It has the powers to interview any persons on administrative justice and obtain relevant information from any person. So it has been given very wide powers, more so when it comes to investigations, so that then they are able to carry out the mandates effectively. There are limitations also to the powers of the Commission. The Commission does not deal with matters that are actively in courts or tribunals, because that is a whole different body. So to avoid conflicts of interest, the Commission will not touch matters that are actively in court. If it are matters against private persons, because the mandate of the Commission then falls strictly when it comes to maladministration, it's for public entities. But for access to information, the mandate extends to private institutions. Criminal offenses, because of the nature of the criminal offenses, then those matters are taken back to the police because they will lead to investigations and going to court, which mandate the Commission does not have. Proceedings or a decision of the Cabinet, grant of honors or awards by the President, matters relating to international relations, matters for which there is a right of appeal or other legal remedies, and if a matter is under lawful investigations by another body. And that is also to avoid the principle of the conflict of interest, because two bodies carrying out investigations on the same matter, then the decisions could vary, and that brings a lot of conflict. In carrying out its mandate, the Commission is accountable, number one, of course, to the public, because those are the people that we serve. And in this regard, the Commission periodically publishes a status of administrative justice in Kenya, so that the members of public are able then to gauge what the Commission has been doing, and if there is need to do more. Parliament is the Commission's oversight body, and that is why the Commission reports biannually to the Parliament on what it has done. Of course, the President, there is also the judicial oversight. If somebody is not content with the verdict or the decision of the Commission, then they can challenge the same in court. There's also oversight by other constitutional commissions and independent offices. The Kenyan Constitution, we have other independent offices like Ethics and Anti-Corruption, National Police Service, and the Commission works hand in hand with those other institutions, so that then they are able to assist other in execution of the mandates. If an issue comes to the Commission and the Commission feels that it will be best dealt with by Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, then the Commission refers the same to the other independent bodies. So the success stories, milestones of the Commission since its establishment. There's been improved complaints management policy when it comes to matters to do with the maladministration, abuse of office, where the Commission has been able to resolve complaints at the rate of 59.8%. Of course, some of the challenges that comes in when it comes to the resolution of complaints of this nature is the same, is actually dependent on the responsiveness of the institution that is in question. So you find that the commission has timelines of when an inquiry is raised that you should respond to the same within 21 days, but then you find the institutions that will respond even after 1 year. So that delays the rate at which a complaint is resolved. There's internal and external capacity development. The Commission has been training public officers from both national and county government, who then in turn supports their respective institution through mainstreaming and implementation of the Commission's requirements. There's enhanced policy and legal reforms through advisory opinions. And in this regard, the Commission has one of the functions of the Commission is to issue what we normally call advisory opinions. And if there's, in this respect, if there's something that a government, a public office, public officer, parastatal has done that the Commission feels that it's against the law, it's against the Constitution, then the Commission can issue what we call advisory opinions to the respective entity, as telling them that as far as the Commission is concerned, this is the law and this is what we think that you should be able to do. And that came out specifically when it came to when there was the issue of COVID-19, where there was a directive by the government that all civil servants should get the COVID jab so that they report to work. So the Commission then issued an advisory and advised the government that this goes against so many principles of discrimination, so many principles of human rights, and the directive was the government was able to shelve the directive. The Commission, even when it comes to matters of elections, the Commission has severally issued advisories to the national and county governments on public officers getting involved in politics, on use of public resources in matters of campaigns, which has been taken in fact by the government. So there's also been improved service delivery through systemic and specific investigations. And in this respect, it's where the Commission feels that an issue keeps on recurring. So for example, there's a specific complaint that keeps on coming from different individuals, maybe on the delay of issuance of passports and those things. So then the Commission, you realize that this is not an officer who is not performing. This is a problem that is with the system. So the Commission then takes up investigations and of what is not working, what is the issue, what is the problem, and once it gets its finding, it gives recommendations to the institution, and the Commission then gives timelines on when the institution is expected to comply with the recommendations. So the Commission has been able to do that when it comes to complaints of delays in issuance of passports. There was also the issue of Kenyan immigrant laborers being mistreated and some losing their lives in Saudi Arabia. So the Commission was able to carry out investigations, involved both governments, and the issue was resolved. There's also the mainstream complaints management in the public sector through the inclusion of resolution of public complaints and implementation of service delivery charters indicators in the performance contracting framework. This has resulted into an increase in number of ministries, departments, and agencies being certified by the Commission. And this is important because this report goes to Parliament. So even when these ministries are going to seek for their budget, those are some of the things that Parliament looks at. So there is what we call Unduma Ombudsman Award, Unduma being a Swahili word, which means service. So there's something that we call Service Ombudsman Award, and this is, we believe that Ombudsman technically is meant to apply soft techniques to ensure compliance because we don't have enforcement mechanism. So the Unduma Ombudsman Award then is meant to reward public officers and public offices that have been exemplary in their in the delivery of public services. And this one has has seen an increase in most of the public offices and officers, then once they know that there's an award in compliance with the directives and recommendations of Ombudsman, then they compete to comply, so that it's becomes sort of an incentive to ensure that there's compliance. There is what we have launched recently called Complaints Management Information System. That is to ensure that members of public can file their complaint anywhere where they are. It is an online platform that you file the complaint through online. Enforcement of access to information and enhanced public awareness, where Ombudsman has gone to the grassroots, where because Kenya has there are so many remote areas that they're not able to reach our centers. So you send some officers to the grassroots to reach out to the citizens there, so that they also know that there is an office of the Ombudsman, and this is what we do, and this is what we can help them with, and this is how they can reach us. Of course, there are challenges, and one of them is that inadequate enforcement mechanism, which I think it cuts across almost all the Ombudsman institutions, lack of enforcement mechanisms when it comes to the recommendations. And there's a discussion going around right now where we are engaging Parliament and members of public to see if Ombudsman, the Commission can be given some enforcement powers, because we have a challenge where we have unresponsiveness of public officers, but there is very little that you can do. The only mechanism we have is to report to Parliament so that Parliament takes over. Delays in the solution of complaints, because it's dependent on how fast the institution or the public officer is going to respond to the Commission's inquiries. Low awareness levels of the Commission mandate and budgetary constraints, which has restricted the Commission from carrying out some of its functions. So that is the end of my presentation, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Isolina. Before I comment, I should mention that all of our panelists' slides will be shared to your emails after. So sorry if you had to take photos and you weren't aware of that. You can delete those. Isolina, I think two things jump out to me from your presentation. One is that Kenya has introduced, or rather the CAJ also oversees access to information. As you might know, C4 is also advocating for a right to information bill, hopefully to be tabled this year. But I don't think we've ever really had discussions on it also being part of an ombudsman institution. And I think that maybe shows or illustrates sort of the diversity or flexibility of institutions, and really how it's up to us to decide how best we think it is to run this oversight body. And secondly, also in terms of diversity of the way in which this is governed, Kenya, or rather the CAJ in Kenya, has enforcement powers, which is interesting. I hope someone will ask questions about that later. But in the interest of time, I think I will open the floor to questions rather than just keep it as my own private conversation. So does anyone have any questions that they'd like to offer to any of our panelists today?
Okay, thank you so much for the insightful sharing from three of the panelists. My name is Pushpan, CEO of C4 Center. The question I have is in terms of the review mechanism for an ombudsman's decision. So I heard a couple of options. One was to basically look at arbitration. The other one is to look at judicial review. So maybe the panel can share which will be a preference, or which would have better option or better applicability in terms of getting the solution done, either through arbitration in terms of reviewing the ombudsman decision, or through judicial review.
Yeah, would anyone like to take that up? Sorry.
Well, perhaps I might just go first. So for me in Australia, my decisions are almost invariably not reviewable. So I have immunity from suit. I can't be sued for the exercise of my powers, providing that they're exercised in good faith. So there is a very small window for judicial review of my decisions, but the model for the Commonwealth Ombudsman is it's quite different to the Kenyan model. I have the powers so that I can inform myself fully, but I can't make binding decisions, and at the same time I can't be sued for what I'm doing. So it's a trade-off, and ultimately the way to challenge my decision is to debate it in public. And if I've done a good job, and if I've based my recommendations on evidence and written it persuasively, then my findings tend to stand for themselves. But I know what Luka said as well about picking your battles wisely, because credibility can be lost if you get something wrong. But perhaps Isolina might like to talk upon the quite different situation for Kenya.
So I think probably there was a slight misunderstanding. The binding powers of the Commission only apply to enforcement of Access to Information Act. So when it comes to the traditional mandate of the Commission, which is to deal with maladministration, what we issue is recommendations. And that is what I was saying, that that is a challenge, because then somebody can opt or not opt to follow the recommendations of the Commission. So the only avenue that the Commission has is Parliament. So you list the institutions and the public officers that have not complied with the recommendations of the Commission, and you present their names to Parliament. The good thing is that very few would want to see themselves on the banned book with Parliament, because that is where they go for their finances. But just when it comes also to the work of the commissions and whether they're immune, they are protected. The directions and what the Commission does, then you cannot sue them in court. They have that immunity. Yes.
Thank you. Luka, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, maybe just like more generally, I think that I think in vast majority of countries, there is no really a review mechanism, either judicial or arbitration, in terms of ombuds institutions. I think one important reason for that is this usual also lack of enforcement mechanisms of ombuds institutions. So it's because they're usually only recommendations, then there are no clear review mechanisms. But maybe another side of this coin, so to say, is like who is in charge of following up to ombuds recommendations. So I think this is maybe important to emphasize. Obviously, ombuds institutions, they are following up their recommendations with the public authorities. But ultimately, this is something that ombuds institutions should do, to track their own performance. But ultimately, this should be the role of government and then the parliament. The government in terms of, coordinating the entire public administration, and then the public authorities should report to the government on whether they have implemented ombuds recommendations or not. And then on the other side, while debating, and this is another point, while debating ombuds institutions' annual report, the parliament should also take a particular look at those recommendations highlighted in ombuds report. They have not been implemented, and then the parliament should also exercise its oversight function over the government, so to say, to enforce those ombuds recommendations that have not been implemented in the meantime.
Thank you, Luka. Thank you. Any other questions? If not, I actually have a question for Iain, but maybe also for Isolina. I'm not too sure how, I suppose, comparable the situation is, but in Malaysia and also in Australia, there's a federal state system. So I'm also wondering what the relationship between federal and state oversight over public services, how that relationship has, I guess, transpired over the past 50 years, and what challenges you might have experienced.
So from an Australian perspective, under our constitution, there's a clear separation of responsibilities for the federal government and then for the state governments. So to some extent, we're looking at different things. So the federal government doesn't run prisons, for example, doesn't run hospitals. So state ombudsman will be looking at issues involving hospitals and prisons. But at the same time, we're all looking at maladministration. So we pay a lot of attention to each other's reports. We come together at least once a year as a group to talk about issues, practices, learnings, and we do have the ability to do things jointly if we thought that was appropriate as well. So it's very useful as an ombudsman to be able to in fact talk to other ombudsmen and say, have you encountered this challenge? What have you done here? What was the response when you did that? Because it's useful to have other ombudsmen to sound out sometimes if you're considering taking a particular path.
Great, thank you. Any other questions from the floor? Any questions online? No questions. To our panelists, do you have any final words perhaps for C4 and also our guests here today? Maybe you can start with Isolina. Do you have anything final that you'd like to add?
Just to thank you for this platform. And we are waiting and to see the success of the Malaysian Ombudsman. And we look forward to even working together as with the CHA. And we wish you all the best.
Thank you so much. Luka?
Yes.
Well, first of all, again, kudos for the report. You know, I would really like that it get the traction also with the government, and then there's a lot of great ideas and analysis in the report that should be picked up by the government and the parliament in the process of creating an institution in Malaysia. And then if I can be of any help throughout this path, please don't hesitate to contact me, and I would definitely following this development how they go. And again, thank you very much for reminding me.
Thank you so much, Luka. And also finally, Iain.
Look, thank you very much for the opportunity, for the invitation to be on the panel. And like my fellow panelists, I commend C4 for the excellent work on the report. And I wish Malaysia well in this journey. And I will just note that two of my other roles as ACT Ombudsman, I oversight the ACT Freedom of Information Act, which is a Right to Information Act. So I'm happy to talk subsequently or another time about oversighting freedom of information. And one of my other roles as Commonwealth Ombudsman is oversighting our national whistleblower regime. So also something else that I know that Malaysia is considering. Very happy to share my knowledge on that if that would be appropriate at some other time. But I wish you very well.
Thank you so much, all three of you, for the encouragement, the really positive support. Sorry?
One more question.
Oh, sorry. We just borrow you all for just one final quick question. Yes? Very quick.
So a law has a process that takes to create, and I think listening to your sharing, there would have been a lot of research and political will put into formulating those laws. I remember in New Zealand, I think there was a law that access to justice for migrants who are stranded or left behind. And the government spent a lot of money to research and formulate that law. So I'm just curious, how much resource should a government put in to come up with a proper legislation with thorough research, cross-border comparisons? Just curious to know. I mean, maybe we should also stand by with budgets like that, right? Thanks.
I think anyone can offer a response.
Well, I can just mention I cannot discuss figures, but then I think it is useful really, and I think the C4 report actually really helps to that direction, to really map different especially different models of ombuds institutions worldwide. This is sometimes we say ombuds is not an institution, it's a function. So maybe also that can be helpful, you know, in understanding, you know, how actually you can apply this function to a local context, and then institution is just a sort of say a shell where you a body that you put in action to really discharge this function. I do believe that, you know, comparative research is very valuable here, just also to learn of success, but also failure stories, and you know what other countries have done in a good or maybe less successful way. So yeah, I would, you know, I can only, as a researcher, I can only embrace research on this particular issue.
Thank you, Luka. Is there any final response to that question from Isolina or Iain?
In terms of figures, I am not able to have a specific figure, but as Luka said, when it comes to passing of a legislation, then I think in every jurisdiction there are certain legal requirements that are needed. So the resources then that are spent there then depends, because then when you pass a legislation, then you have to, that like Kenya requires that you have to carry out public participation, which comes with the resources. There's the issue of course, benchmarking and all those things. So then I don't think you have a specific figure, unless probably there are complaints about misuse of funds and those things, and the ombudsman can come in place. But in terms of figures, it's very hard to point out a specific figure.
Thank you, Isolina. Iain, anything to add?
Look, just very briefly, I mean, in Australia, it's common for legislation to be the subject of inquiries. So a parliamentary committee can be set up, conduct an inquiry, and that can be a very quick and effective way of gathering information. Civil society institutions, my own office, we regularly make submissions to parliamentary inquiries about proposed legislation, and government departments can all bring forward the arguments that they think pro or either in favour or against a particular type of bill or against particular provisions of the bill and how to best develop it. So it doesn't have to be just about research done by government. You can actually harness other participants who may have a wealth of knowledge already on that subject.
Thank you so much. Test, sorry. All right. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone, once again. It says on this agenda that my speech is actually half an hour, but it's not even going to reach like a tenth of that. I think there are just two things that I would want to mention. Firstly is, I think one of the main aims, as we've spoken about today, has been for this report to spark discussion. And I think there's been a lot of interesting ideas that have come up, a lot of interesting questions, but mostly the scope of the questions, I think, is something that needs a little more discussion with all of the parties involved, including CSOs, government, and that's something that we really look forward to. Thanks again to the panelists from the other jurisdictions who have also offered to give us some advice in the future. I think that's something we really look forward to. The second thing I think is a little more personal, because it might not have been mentioned. Working at C4, often we receive emails from whistleblowers or from people, individual citizens who have complaints, which may not necessarily be tied to corruption, but often they feel that they have nowhere else to go. And so they'll sort of send us all of these documents, all of these complaints, while also CCing the Prime Minister and the Chief Commissioner of MACC and the police and all of these other institutions. And very often we don't really know what to do with these complaints, because there is nothing much that we can do other than advise them to certain parties. But the question then becomes, well, what is it actually going to do for us? There is, I think, this in these emails, what it reflects is the sense of powerlessness amongst a lot of the citizenry to get redress from any sort of institution to assist them, because these government sort of prerogatives and protocols are also often quite complicated and difficult to navigate if you're not familiar with them already. So when they go to these offices, then they get told to go to another office, and then it becomes really complicated. And I think that really emphasizes, again, the importance of the Ombuds institution. It's not only about transparency or, you know, the functioning of public service, but returning power to citizens. It's a form of empowering citizens in a way which I think we've not felt for a very long time. So with that, I would like to thank everyone who attended today. Really appreciate your presence and your support. Thank you once again to our tech team behind there for helping us ensure a smooth event. And also, we hope to see you all again in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your closing remarks, Arif. And with that, our event for today is over. Thank you so much for everyone for attending. Please fill in the feedback form. The QR can be found on your screen, on the screens right now. Please scan it and fill it back up, please. We have the report will be published online on our website either by today or by early tomorrow at the latest. If you are interested, oh, it's up already? Great. The report is up on our website. If you are interested in perusing the research that Prashant has done in greater detail, all 104 pages of it, it is all on our website. Please go take a look at it so his work is not in vain. Once again, thank you very much for attending our event, and we hope to see you at future events. Have a great day. Thank you, everyone.